Hello everyone and welcome back to Midnight Horror. I know many of you use these videos to fall asleep, so before you drift off, I'd love it if you could leave a comment letting me know where you're listening from around the world. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying the video. Story 1. It had been a long night and all I wanted was to get home. The city streets were slick with rain, neon lights reflecting off the pavement as I waited on the curb. My phone buzzed, alerting me that my Uber had arrived, and I spotted a black sedan pulling up to the designated location. Without thinking twice, I opened the door and slid into the back seat, sighing in relief. The driver didn't acknowledge me, which I found odd. Usually they confirmed my name before starting the ride, but he simply pulled away from the curb. I glanced at my phone to check the app, but to my surprise, the screen was frozen. The car's interior smelled of stale air freshener, and the windows were tinted darker than usual. Something felt off and a cold unease settled in my stomach. This is for Alex, right? I asked, hoping for some reassurance. The driver didn't answer at first, his hands gripping the wheel tightly as he maneuvered through the streets. My heart began to pound as I repeated myself, louder this time. He finally responded, his voice low and monotone. Yeah. He didn't look at me through the mirror, and his answer was too curt to be convincing. I glanced at the GPS on his dashboard, but the screen was turned off. Panic started creeping in as I realized I hadn't double-checked the license plate before getting in. Swallowing my fear, I reached for the door handle, but it didn't budge. The locks were engaged, and I couldn't find a manual way to unlock them. Hey, I think there's been a mistake. Can you let me out here? My voice was steady, but my palms were clammy. The driver ignored me, his gaze fixed straight ahead. My breath came faster, and I pressed my phone's power button, hoping to restart it. The screen stayed dark, and I cursed under my breath. Seriously, I need to get out, I said more forcefully, shifting in my seat. The driver still didn't react, but I noticed his hands tightening around the wheel. The city lights blurred past as he made unexpected turns, heading into a less crowded area. I pressed my hands against the window, trying to see where we were going. The streets became narrower, lined with closed shops and dark alleyways. My stomach churned as I realized we were heading away from the main roads. I reached into my pocket, searching for anything to defend myself with. My keys, a pen, anything sharp enough to use if necessary. My fingers trembled as I clenched my house key between them, my mind racing through possible escape scenarios. I had to stay calm, but every second that passed sent another wave of terror through me. Summoning all my courage, I spoke again, this time with authority. If you don't let me out, I'm calling the cops. I lifted my phone, pretending it was working. The driver finally reacted, his head tilting slightly as if considering his next move. My pulse pounded as he reached for something in the front seat. Before I could process what was happening, the car slowed, and he pulled into a dimly lit parking lot. My breath caught in my throat as he put the car in park, the engine still running. He turned around, his face shadowed, but I could see the outline of his expression, cold, emotionless. My grip tightened on my key, my muscles tensed for action. "Why are you so scared?" he asked, his voice eerily calm. I couldn't tell if he was amused or irritated. My body screamed at me to run, but I was trapped. My eyes darted around the car, searching for anything I could use to break the window. My heartbeat thundered in my ears as I calculated my next move. Then, without warning, I slammed my shoulder against the door, hoping to jar it loose. The driver didn't flinch, watching me like a predator studying its prey. I didn't have time to second guess myself. If I didn't get out now, I might not get another chance. My breaths came in short gasps as I aimed a kick at the window. The glass didn't shatter, but it made a loud enough noise to attract attention. A figure appeared in the distance, approaching the car with cautious steps. The driver noticed and suddenly put the car in reverse. My stomach lurched as he sped out of the lot, away from the stranger. Panic clawed at my chest as I realized my attempted escape had backfired. The streets grew even emptier as we drove further away from civilization. My hands shook as I tried the door again, still locked. I had one last option. If I couldn't break the window, I had to fight. With all my strength, I lunged forward, aiming for the driver's head. My sudden movement caught him off guard, and the car swerved violently. He cursed, trying to regain control, but I didn't let up. I clawed at his arm, yanking at the wheel, desperate to force a stop. The car spun out of control, tires screeching as we veered off the road. The impact was jarring as we hit a barrier, and I felt myself thrown against the seat. The airbag didn't deploy, but the sudden stop gave me the opening I needed. Ignoring the pain in my shoulder, I reached for the door again. This time it opened. I stumbled out, my legs shaky beneath me, but I forced myself to run. Behind me, the driver groaned, trying to recover from the crash. I didn't look back, sprinting toward the nearest light source. My breath was ragged, my body running purely on adrenaline. A gas station came into view, and I ran inside, gasping for air as I slammed the door behind me. The cashier looked up, startled by my disheveled state. "Call the police," I panted, bracing myself against the counter. My hands were trembling, but I was safe for now. Minutes later, flashing red and blue lights filled the parking lot. The officers took my statement as I tried to calm my racing heart. They found the car abandoned a few blocks away, but the driver was gone. My stomach churned at the thought that he had vanished into the night, free to do this again. That night I barely slept, my mind replaying every terrifying second. The police assured me they would investigate, but I knew it wouldn't change what had happened. I had made one careless mistake, getting into the wrong car, and it nearly cost me my life. From that moment on, I swore to always double-check before getting inside. It was a mistake I would never make again. Story 2. I arrived at the Airbnb late in the evening, exhausted from the long drive. The house was a charming little cabin tucked away in the woods, just as advertised. The host had left the key under the mat, and everything seemed in order as I stepped inside. The living room had a cozy feel, with a stone fireplace and a large window overlooking the trees. I placed my bags near the couch and wandered into the kitchen, checking out the amenities. Everything seemed clean and well-maintained, which put me at ease. I decided to take a quick shower before settling in for the night. The bathroom was small but modern, with white tiles and a large mirror above the sink. As I turned on the shower, I noticed something unusual near the vent. A small, dark object was positioned oddly between the slats, barely noticeable. My heart pounded as I moved closer, reaching up to examine it. To my horror, it was a tiny camera lens staring right back at me. I yanked my hand away and stepped back, my mind racing with possibilities. Had someone been watching me? How long had it been there? A sick feeling settled in my stomach as I realized I wasn't alone in the way I had thought. Panic set in as I grabbed a towel and hurried out of the bathroom. I retrieved my phone from my bag and started searching online for hidden camera detection methods. Holding up the flashlight, I scanned the room, checking every vent, smoke detector, and power outlet. To my dismay, I found another camera tucked inside the smoke detector above the bed. A cold shiver ran down my spine as I imagined how many people had unknowingly been recorded in this place. Someone had deliberately placed these cameras in intimate spaces. I knew I had to leave immediately, but a part of me wanted to confront the host first. Taking a deep breath, I sent a message explaining what I had found and demanded an explanation. Minutes passed in silence before my phone vibrated with a reply. The host's response was unsettlingly vague, telling me that I was mistaken and there were no such devices in the house. Anger boiled in my chest at the blatant lie. I took pictures of the cameras and dialed the non-emergency police line, my hands trembling. As I waited for a response, I began packing my belongings. The last thing I wanted was to spend another minute in that place. My mind raced with fear, wondering if the host was watching me right now, seeing my every move. A sudden knock at the door made me freeze. It was nearly midnight. Who would be here at this hour? My pulse pounded in my ears as I cautiously approached, peeking through the peephole. A man stood outside, his face partially obscured by the dim porch light. He didn't knock again but remained there, unmoving. I backed away, my stomach twisting with dread. Had the host sent someone? I grabbed my car keys, deciding I couldn't wait any longer. If I left quietly through the back door, I could avoid the stranger outside. Clutching my bag, I tiptoed toward the kitchen, forcing myself to stay calm. The moment I unlocked the back door, the porch light flickered. The sudden darkness sent a jolt of fear through me, but I didn't hesitate. I pushed the door open and ran straight to my car, my breaths coming in ragged gasps. The engine roared to life, and I threw the car into reverse, my eyes darting toward the house. The man was no longer at the front door. My heart pounded as I scanned the driveway, half expecting him to appear in front of my car. I sped down the narrow road leading back to the main highway, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. My phone buzzed on the seat beside me, but I didn't dare look at it. I just needed to get as far away as possible. Once I reached a well-lit gas station, I pulled over and checked my messages. The host had sent another reply, claiming I had misunderstood and should return so they could discuss it. My stomach churned at the audacity. I called the police again, this time reporting the incident in full detail. They assured me they would investigate and advised me to find a safe place for the night. I booked a room at a nearby motel, my nerves still on edge. Sleep didn't come easily. Every sound outside made me jump, and the thought of those cameras haunted me. Who else had been recorded in that house, and for what purpose? The next morning, an officer called to update me. They had sent someone to check the property, and the cameras were indeed there. The host was being questioned, but it was unclear how long they had been operating. Relief washed over me, but it was mixed with unease. Even if the host was caught, how many other places had cameras hidden inside them? How many unsuspecting guests had no idea they were being watched? I filed an official complaint with the rental platform, providing the evidence I had collected. They assured me the listing would be removed, but that didn't erase the experience from my mind. Trust had been shattered in a place meant to be a temporary home. The drive back home felt longer than before. I kept glancing in my rearview mirror, half expecting to see a car following me. My paranoia lingered, making every stop feel unsafe. Weeks later, I checked online to see if any news had come from the case. The host had been arrested for privacy violations, but no further details were given. The house had been taken off the rental platform, but that didn't mean others weren't out there. I never booked another Airbnb after that. Hotels, while not perfect, felt safer. I made it a habit to scan every room I stayed in, checking for hidden cameras before settling in. The violation had left a permanent mark on me. Some nights I still think about the cameras I didn't find. The ones that might still be hidden in places people least expect. The ones that are still recording, watching, waiting for their next victim. Story 3. It started with small things. I would notice the same dark sedan parked a few houses down from mine, its engine idling in the early hours of the morning. At first, I told myself it was just a coincidence, that someone in the neighborhood had a guest who liked to leave late. But then I saw the car again outside my workplace, parked at the far end of the lot. I tried not to panic, but something about it felt off. The windows were tinted, and I could never see who was inside. Every time I glanced in its direction, I had the eerie sensation that someone was watching me. By the time I left work, the car would be gone, as if it had been there only to remind me of its presence. Then I started seeing him. A man standing across the street from my apartment building, hands in the pockets of a dark hoodie, head tilted slightly downward. He never approached, never spoke. He just stood there, waiting as if for something inevitable. At first, I convinced myself I was imagining things, but deep down I knew better. The feeling of being watched never left me. When I walked home from the grocery store, I could sense him behind me, just far enough to keep me from confronting him. If I turned around too quickly, he would slip into the shadows, blending into alleyways and side streets. My heart pounded every time I checked my locks, triple checking them before I went to bed. I told myself not to be paranoid, but the signs became impossible to ignore. Footsteps in the hall outside my apartment late at night, heavy and deliberate. The sound of someone pacing just beyond my door, stopping only when I got close enough to listen. My doormat was slightly shifted in the morning, as if someone had stood there for too long. One night I stayed late at work, hoping that if I changed my routine I could lose him. But when I finally left the office, the dark sedan was there again, parked beneath the dim glow of the street lamp. My stomach twisted into knots. I walked briskly, my hands clutching my keys so tightly my knuckles turned white. I dared to glance over my shoulder, and there he was half a block behind me, moving at a measured pace. I turned onto my street and bolted for my apartment, fumbling with my keys as I reached my door. My breath came in ragged gasps as I locked it behind me, pressing my back against the wood. I was safe, at least for the night, but I knew he was still out there, waiting. The next morning, my nerves were frayed beyond reason. I hadn't slept, jumping at every creak and shift in the apartment. I was done pretending this wasn't happening. My hands shook as I dialed the police, my voice barely steady as I explained the situation. The officer on the other end listened in silence before responding with words that made my blood run cold. "We already know who he is." The way they said it, calm, almost resigned, made me shiver. I asked what they meant, but they only told me they would send someone over. When the officer arrived, he had a strange look in his eyes, something like recognition. He asked me to describe the man, the car, every detail I could remember. I answered everything, but with each word, his expression darkened. Finally, he let out a slow breath and looked me in the eye. "You should stay somewhere else for a few days." That was not the answer I expected. My stomach twisted as I pressed him for more information. Who was this man? Why was he following me? But the officer only shook his head, saying it was an open case and that I needed to be cautious. That night, I packed a bag and stayed with a friend across town, but sleep never came. The next day, I went back to my apartment, half expecting everything to be fine, that maybe this was all some misunderstanding. But when I reached my door, there was something waiting for me. A note tucked beneath my doormat, written in small, precise handwriting. It read, "You can't hide forever." My heart slammed against my ribs. I scanned the street, expecting to see him standing there, watching as he always did. But the sidewalk was empty, the sedan nowhere in sight. The silence felt suffocating. I ran back to my car and drove straight to the police station. This time they took me into a back office, a different officer speaking to me in hushed tones. They told me that the man had been following people for years, that he had a pattern of fixation on certain individuals. They had never been able to catch him, never able to predict who he would target next. And now it was me. The officer assured me they would keep an eye on my place, that they would do their best to find him. But their words felt hollow, like they had said this before and it had never amounted to anything. That night I stayed at a hotel, the weight of exhaustion pressing down on me, but still I couldn't sleep. Days passed, and I saw nothing of him. No car, no shadow in the distance, no note waiting for me at my door. The police checked in but had no updates. It was like he had vanished. I should have been relieved, but instead I felt like I was waiting for something worse. Then, one night, I heard it. A knock at my window. I was on the second floor. Slowly, I turned my head, dread creeping up my spine. The blinds were closed, but I could see the faintest shift of a shadow behind them. My throat closed up. I reached for my phone, but the second I grabbed it, the shadow moved away. I didn't hear footsteps, just silence. I called the police again, my voice barely above a whisper. They arrived within minutes, searching the area, but found nothing. No footprints, no signs of forced entry. Just a lingering presence in the air, a feeling that I would never truly be safe. That was a month ago. I moved to a new apartment, changed my routine, even switched jobs. I stopped answering unknown calls, stopped looking over my shoulder as much. But sometimes, when I wake in the middle of the night, I feel it. That undeniable sensation of being watched. And I wonder if he's still out there, waiting for me to let my guard down. Story 4. I arrived at the hotel late in the evening, exhausted from a long day of traveling. The lobby was quiet, save for the receptionist who barely looked up as she handed me my key card. My room was on the 7th floor, and as I rode the elevator up, I found myself longing for a hot shower and some sleep. When I reached my door, I slid the key card into the reader, but the light flashed red. I tried again, assuming I hadn't swiped it fast enough, but the result was the same. Annoyed, I jiggled the handle, wondering if it was stuck, but it didn't budge. Sighing, I turned and walked back to the elevator, descending to the front desk. The receptionist barely reacted when I explained my situation, simply reactivating my card and handing it back. I thanked her and returned upstairs, hoping the issue was resolved. Back at my door, I tried the card again, but it still wouldn't work. This time I knocked, half expecting an answer, but silence greeted me. I checked the room number again, confirming that I was at the right place. Frustrated, I called the front desk and explained that my key still wasn't working. The receptionist, in the same monotone voice, said she would send security up. A few minutes later, an older man in a hotel uniform arrived, holding a master key. He swiped the key card, but the door remained locked. Frowning, he tried again with no success. Muttering under his breath, he radioed for maintenance, who arrived with a set of tools and began working on the lock. As I stood in the hallway, I couldn't shake the unease creeping into my gut. It shouldn't be this hard to open a hotel room door. The security guard noticed my expression and assured me that sometimes the electronic locks malfunctioned. Finally, after several minutes, the lock clicked and the maintenance worker pushed the door open. I stepped inside, but something was immediately wrong. The room wasn't mine, my belongings were gone, and someone else's things were inside. I turned to the security guard, my stomach twisting. He looked just as confused as I felt and stepped in behind me, glancing around. The bed was neatly made, and a suitcase sat near the closet, but it wasn't mine. I hurried to the closet, pulling the door open, hoping to see my clothes. Instead, a row of neatly pressed suits hung inside, none of which belonged to me. The bathroom counter was lined with toiletries that I had never seen before. "This isn't my room," I said, my voice coming out hoarse. The security guard frowned and picked up the phone on the nightstand, calling the front desk. He asked them to check who was assigned to this room. The receptionist responded after a long pause, and the security guard's brow furrowed deeper. He turned to me, a strange look on his face. According to the hotel system, I had never been assigned to this room. My heart pounded in my chest as I shook my head. "That's impossible," I said. "I checked in just an hour ago. I was given this key." I pulled out my card and showed it to him, but he only glanced at it. "We should go downstairs," he said, his voice unusually calm. He gestured for me to step out, and I followed him, my mind racing. None of this made sense if this wasn't my room, or were my things. Back at the front desk, the receptionist typed something into the computer and shook her head. "You were checked in," she said, "but to a different room." She slid a new key card across the desk. I hesitated before picking it up, my skin crawling. "Then whose room was I just trying to get into?" I asked. The receptionist didn't answer right away, her eyes fixed on the screen. "No one," she finally said. "That room hasn't been occupied in days." My stomach twisted painfully, and I turned to the security guard, who looked just as disturbed as I felt. "That's not possible," I said. There were clothes, suitcases, personal items. Someone was living in that room. My voice was rising, but I didn't care. I needed answers. The receptionist's face paled slightly. "We'll have housekeeping check it," she murmured, avoiding my gaze. "For now, you should go to your assigned room." I took the new key card and made my way to the correct room, feeling the weight of unease pressing against my chest. When I entered, everything was as it should be, my bag on the bed, my shoes by the door. I double-checked the closet and bathroom, making sure nothing was out of place. Everything was where I had left it, yet I couldn't shake the feeling that something was deeply wrong. Sleep didn't come easily that night. Every noise in the hallway made me tense, and I kept replaying the moment the door finally opened. If no one had been staying in that room, then where had those things come from? The next morning, I returned to the front desk, determined to get more information. The same receptionist was on duty, but when I asked about the room again, she only shook her head. "There was nothing there," she said. "Housekeeping checked, and the room was empty." Her expression was unreadable, but I knew she was lying. I had seen those belongings with my own eyes. I wanted to argue, to demand an explanation, but something about the way she looked at me made me stop. It was as if she was warning me not to ask any more questions. I checked out later that afternoon, my mind still spinning. As I waited for my taxi, I glanced up at the 7th floor. My room's curtains were drawn, but the window beside it had the blinds open. For a brief second, I thought I saw a figure standing there, watching, but when I blinked, the window was empty. Story 5. Driving alone at night was something I had gotten used to, but that didn't mean I liked it. The long, empty road stretching ahead of me, the occasional flicker of headlights in my rearview mirror, it all had a way of making the world feel eerily quiet. That night, I was halfway home when I saw the flashing red and blue lights in my mirror, signaling me to pull over. I felt my stomach twist as I slowed down and moved onto the shoulder of the road. Something about this felt off, though I couldn't quite place why. The vehicle behind me wasn't a marked police car. just a dark sedan with lights mounted on top. As I sat there, gripping the steering wheel, I watched the man in uniform step out and approach my car. His uniform looked official enough, but something didn't sit right with me. It was too crisp, too clean, as if it had never been worn before. The badge on his chest caught the dim glow of my headlights, but there was no nameplate beneath it. When he reached my window, I hesitated before rolling it down, keeping my hands firmly on the wheel. "License and registration," he said, his voice calm but lacking any real authority. There was something unnatural about the way he stood, as if he were mimicking how a real officer would behave. His face was partially shadowed, but I could see a faint smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. My pulse quickened as I reached slowly for my wallet, my instincts screaming that something was wrong. I decided to ask a question, hoping to gauge his reaction. "What's the reason for the stop, officer?" I asked, keeping my tone steady. He didn't answer right away, instead tilting his head slightly as if he hadn't expected me to ask. Then, after a pause, he said, "Routine check. Just need to see your ID." That wasn't right. Routine checks weren't done like this, not on an empty stretch of highway in the middle of the night. I glanced at the car behind him, noting that it had no police markings at all. A real officer would have announced their department, given a clear reason for stopping me, and wouldn't have hesitated when questioned. A cold sweat broke out on the back of my neck as I tried to think fast. I knew I had two choices: comply and hope for the best, or stall and look for a way out. My fingers tightened around my wallet, but instead of handing it over, I reached for my phone. "I'd like to call this in, just for confirmation," I said, my voice steady but firm. His expression darkened immediately. "That won't be necessary," he said quickly, his tone sharper now. He took a step closer, placing one hand on my car door. My heart pounded as I realized just how alone I was on this road, with no other cars in sight. The way he was acting now, I knew for certain this man wasn't a cop. Every instinct told me to get out of there, but I had to be smart about it. If I made the wrong move, he might react badly. Keeping my voice calm, I forced a polite smile. "I understand, but I just want to be sure. You know how it is these days." I lifted my phone slowly, pretending to dial. His entire posture changed in an instant. His fingers tensed against my car door, his eyes flicking toward the road as if calculating something. "Step out of the vehicle," he ordered, his voice now completely devoid of the calm demeanor from before. That was the moment I knew I was in real danger. I didn't respond. Instead, I made a split-second decision and slammed my car into drive. The tires screeched as I swerved back onto the road, gripping the wheel tightly as I accelerated. My hands shook, adrenaline flooding my veins as I kept my eyes on the road ahead. In my mirror, I saw him standing there for a moment before running back to his car. The headlights behind me flared to life, and I knew he wasn't going to let me go that easily. My heart raced as the dark sedan sped up, closing the distance between us. He wasn't a cop, he was something else, something worse. And now he was chasing me down an empty road with no witnesses in sight. I kept my foot pressed to the gas, scanning the road desperately for any sign of an exit or a populated area. The town wasn't too far away, but I wasn't sure I could make it before he caught up. My phone was still in my lap, and with trembling fingers, I hit the emergency call button. 911, what's your emergency? The operator's voice came through, steady and calm. "I'm being followed by a fake cop," I said breathlessly, barely keeping my car steady. He pulled me over, but something was off. Now he's chasing me. My voice wavered, but I forced myself to stay focused. "Stay on the line with me," the operator said. "Can you describe the vehicle?" I quickly gave as much detail as I could, all while keeping my eyes locked on the road ahead. The sedan was still behind me, but it wasn't gaining as fast as before. Maybe he realized I had called for help. "We have officers en route to your location," the operator assured me. "Keep driving toward a well-lit area if you can." I nodded, even though she couldn't see me, and gripped the wheel harder. The town's lights were coming into view now, a distant but welcome sight. If I could just make it there, I'd be safe. The sedan suddenly swerved to the left, then the right, as if debating whether to continue the chase. I watched as it slowed down, then made a sharp U-turn and disappeared into the darkness. My breath hitched as I realized he was giving up. He wasn't willing to risk running into real cops. Moments later, flashing lights approached from the opposite direction. A real police cruiser pulled up beside me as I slowed down, my entire body shaking from the ordeal. An officer stepped out and signaled for me to park. This time I knew for certain it was the real thing. I rolled down my window, barely able to get the words out. "That guy wasn't a cop," I said, my voice hoarse. The officer nodded. "We've had reports of a man impersonating law enforcement in this area," he confirmed. "You did the right thing by not stopping completely." I let out a shaky breath, relief washing over me in waves. The officer took my statement and assured me they'd do everything they could to track the guy down. But as I sat there in the glow of real police lights, I couldn't shake the thought of what might have happened if I had stepped out of my car. That night, I learned a terrifying lesson sometimes. Danger wears a badge, and if something feels wrong, it probably is. Story 6. The highway stretched endlessly before me, a lonely ribbon of asphalt cutting through the empty desert. The sun had set hours ago, leaving only the glow of my headlights to illuminate the road ahead. I had been driving for hours, fighting the creeping exhaustion that clung to my limbs like a heavy fog. Up ahead, a figure stood by the side of the road, arm outstretched in the universal sign for a ride. His silhouette was long and lean, his posture almost too still against the backdrop of the barren landscape. Something about him made me hesitate, but the thought of leaving someone stranded in the middle of nowhere gnawed at me. I slowed the car and rolled down the window, eyeing him warily as he stepped closer. "Where you headed?" I asked, keeping my foot on the brake. He peered inside, his face shadowed, but his voice was smooth when he answered. "Anywhere up the road would be fine." His vague response unsettled me, but I nodded and unlocked the passenger door. He slid inside with practiced ease, shutting the door with a slow, deliberate motion. As I pulled back onto the road, he settled into his seat, his gaze fixed straight ahead. Minutes passed in silence, the only sounds the hum of the engine and the faint whistling of wind through a crack in the window. I stole a glance at him and noticed how rigidly he sat, his hands folded neatly in his lap. "You from around here?" I asked, hoping to cut the tension. He turned his head slightly, his expression unreadable. "Just passing through," he said, his voice carrying an odd, empty tone. Something about his presence felt off, a creeping unease settling in my stomach. I nodded, gripping the wheel tighter, feeling the hairs on the back of my neck rise. I had picked up hitchhikers before, but none had ever made me this uneasy. I glanced at the exit signs, considering whether I should drop him off sooner rather than later. "Long drive?" he asked suddenly, his voice breaking the silence. I nodded, forcing a smile. "Yeah, heading a few states over. Just trying to cover as much ground as I can tonight." He hummed in response, his fingers tapping idly on his knee. "You ever pick up strangers often?" he asked, his tone carrying something beneath it, something unreadable. I shrugged, trying to keep my voice casual. "Sometimes. Never had much trouble." The moment the words left my mouth, I regretted them. He turned his head fully now, his gaze locking onto me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. "Guess there's a first time for everything," he murmured, his lips curving into a slow, deliberate smile. A chill ran through me and I swallowed hard, keeping my eyes on the road. Something about that smile made my pulse quicken. I forced a chuckle, my hands tightening around the wheel. "Yeah, I suppose so." I reached for the radio, needing some kind of noise to cut through the thick silence, but as soon as I touched the dial, he spoke again. "No need for music. I prefer the quiet." His voice was firm, almost commanding. I let my hand drop back to my lap, an uneasy tension gripping my chest. The road stretched on, each mile feeling longer than the last. I stole another glance at him and noticed how he hadn't moved much, his posture unnervingly stiff. My nerves were on edge, my instincts screaming at me that something wasn't right. Finally, I spotted a sign for a small rest stop a few miles ahead. Relief flooded me as I forced a casual tone. "Hey, I'm stopping soon for gas. You can get off there if you need to." He didn't respond right away, just kept staring ahead with that unsettling stillness. Then, after a long pause, he turned his head and said, "I think I'll stay a little longer." His voice was softer now, almost amused. My stomach twisted at his words. I tightened my grip on the wheel, my mind racing. "Sorry, man, but I don't go too far with passengers," I lied, keeping my voice steady. "This is where I let folks off." He chuckled, the sound low and humorless. "That's funny. I don't recall asking for permission to stay." My heart pounded as he shifted slightly, his body turning toward me now. The exit for the rest stop loomed ahead, and I flicked on my turn signal. As I slowed, he reached out, pressing a hand against my forearm. His grip was firm, his touch ice cold. "I wouldn't do that if I were you." A deep, instinctual fear clawed at my chest, but I forced my face to remain neutral. "Look, man, I don't want any trouble," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. His fingers tightened briefly before he let go, leaning back into his seat. "Trouble?" he echoed, tilting his head. "Oh, you'll know trouble soon enough." The way he said it, so calm, so assured, made my breath catch. I took the exit anyway, my mind set. As soon as I reached the gas station, I would make a run for it. But as I pulled into the dimly lit lot, the hitchhiker simply smiled wider. I killed the engine and unbuckled my seatbelt, my movements slow and deliberate. "This is your stop," I said firmly. He didn't move. He just sat there, watching me, his grin unwavering. My hands trembled as I reached for the door handle. Before I could move, he leaned in, whispering, "You should have kept driving." My breath hitched as the overhead lights flickered, plunging the lot into momentary darkness. When the lights came back on, the passenger seat was empty. My heart pounded violently as I turned, searching the shadows outside. There was no sign of him, no footprints in the dirt, no sound of retreating footsteps. The seatbelt lay buckled, as if he had never been there at all. A cold dread seeped into my bones as I stared at the empty seat, my breath coming in shallow gasps. Then, just as I reached for my phone, the radio crackled to life, static filling the silence. And beneath it, a voice whispered, "See you soon." Story 7. The first night I heard the knock, I thought I had imagined it. It was exactly 3 a.m., and the sound was so precise. 3 solid knocks against my apartment door. My heart pounded as I sat up in bed, straining to listen. But when I crept toward the peephole, the hallway outside was empty. The second night it happened again. This time I was awake before it came, my mind tense with anticipation. 3 deliberate knocks echoed in the silence, and when I opened the door seconds later, I found nothing but the dimly lit corridor stretching ahead. By the third night, I was certain it wasn't a coincidence. I kept my phone in my hand, ready to record or call for help if necessary. At 3 a.m. sharp, the knocks came 3 firm raps, evenly spaced, and when I flung the door open, the hallway was still and empty. I asked my neighbors the next day if they had heard anything strange. Mrs. Patel in 4 billion just shook her head, saying she slept deeply, and the young man in 3 Seek looked at me like I was crazy. No one else had heard the knocks, and I started to wonder if I was losing my mind. That night, I decided to set up my phone to record the door. I balanced it on the kitchen counter with a clear view of the entrance, hit record, and sat awake in the darkness. When 3 a.m. arrived, the knocks came loud and deliberate, but when I played the recording back, there was nothing. The silence on the video unnerved me more than the knocks themselves. I knew I had heard them, felt the vibrations through the floor, but there was no proof. Something was wrong, and I was starting to feel like my apartment wasn't entirely mine anymore. On the 6th night, I tried something different. I placed a line of flour in front of the door, hoping to catch footprints. The knocks came just as before, and I jumped out of bed to check. The flour was undisturbed, no marks, no sign that anyone had been there at all. I hardly slept after that, always waiting for 3 a.m. I thought about staying somewhere else, but the fear that the knocking might follow me kept me rooted in place. My apartment had become a trap, a space filled with waiting, with dread thickening the air as the night stretched on. On the 9th night, something changed. The knocks were heavier, deeper, resonating through the walls. They weren't coming from the front door anymore, they were inside. I froze, feeling my stomach drop as I realized the sound had come from my bedroom closet. I couldn't move at first, too terrified to even breathe. The closet door was shut, as it always was, but now it felt ominous, looming in the dark. When I finally found the courage to move, I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight, my hand shaking as I stepped forward. The closet was empty. My clothes hung undisturbed, my storage boxes stacked neatly, nothing out of place. Yet the feeling of something unseen lingered, thick and oppressive, and I slammed the door shut, pressing my back against it as I tried to calm my breathing. The next day, I spent hours researching my building, looking for any clue, any history that might explain what was happening. There were no reports of deaths, no urban legends, nothing that would explain why someone or something was knocking at 3 a.m. every night. By the 12th night, I was exhausted, my nerves frayed from lack of sleep. I sat by the door, my hand hovering over the doorknob as I waited. When the knocks came, I wrenched the door open instantly, determined to catch whatever was doing this, but once again, the hallway was empty. Except this time, something was different. A small object lay on the floor just outside my door. It was a single, rusted key, old and worn, its surface corroded with time. I picked it up with trembling fingers, my mind racing with questions. I examined every lock in my apartment, but the key didn't fit anywhere. I had no idea what had opened or why it had appeared. That night, I barely slept, clutching the key in my hand, half expecting more knocks, but none came. For the first time in 2 weeks, 3 a.m. passed in silence. I should have been relieved, but the quiet felt wrong, heavier than before. The knocking had stopped, but I had the sense that something had changed, something unseen had shifted, waiting for me to notice. The next day, I decided to ask the building manager about my unit. He hesitated before answering, then admitted my apartment had been vacant for a long time before I moved in. The last tenant had left suddenly, breaking their lease without explanation. I pressed him for details, but he only shrugged, saying the tenant had been young, quiet, and had never caused problems. The only odd thing, he added, was that they had left a key behind. When I showed him the one I found, he paled, his eyes darting to my apartment door. I wanted to leave, but something kept me there, an unfinished story pulling at me. That night, I placed the key on my nightstand and lay awake, listening. The silence stretched on, but just as I began to drift off, a faint sound reached me, a soft creaking, like a door slowly opening. I bolted upright, my eyes darting around the room. My closet door stood open. I was sure I had closed it before bed. The air in the room felt heavy, charged with something unseen, something waiting. My pulse pounded as I forced myself to stand, to approach the open door. Inside, something had changed. My clothes and boxes were pushed aside, revealing a narrow gap at the back wall. A small, almost imperceptible seam ran along the edges, like the outline of a hidden door. My breath caught as I reached for the rusted key on my nightstand. I hesitated, my hand shaking as I pressed the key against the seam. The moment it touched, a soft click echoed in the silence, and the hidden door creaked open slightly. A dark void stretched beyond it, a space that shouldn't exist. My mind screamed to shut it, to leave it alone. But something inside me needed to know. I took a deep breath, stepped forward, and pushed the door open wider. Cold air rushed out, carrying the scent of damp wood and something faintly metallic. My phone's flashlight barely penetrated the darkness, revealing only a narrow passage leading further in. I turned back once, glancing at my apartment, my safe, known space. Then I stepped inside. The door creaked shut behind me, sealing me in the silence, and I understood I hadn't been alone all this time. Something had been waiting, knocking, calling me to find it, and now I had answered. Story 8. I had been hearing noises at night for weeks. At first I chalked it up to the house settling, or maybe a raccoon finding its way into the attic. But as the nights stretched on, the noises became more distinct: footsteps, the shuffle of something heavy, even the faint sound of breathing. Lying in bed, I tried to rationalize what I was hearing. Maybe it was my mind playing tricks on me, or perhaps my neighbors were making more noise than usual. But deep down, I felt something was off, something I couldn't ignore any longer. Determined to get to the bottom of it, I bought a small motion-activated camera and set it up in the attic. I figured if it was an animal, I'd call pest control, and if it was nothing, at least I could put my mind at ease. That night, I went to bed with an uneasy feeling, half hoping to catch nothing at all. The next morning, I checked the footage with a cup of coffee in hand. My heart pounded as I watched the screen, my fingers tightening around the mug. What I saw made my blood turn cold. A figure, barely visible in the dim light, crawling on all fours across the attic floor. I froze, my mind refusing to accept what I was seeing. The figure moved with slow, deliberate motions, almost as if it knew where the camera was. Then, at one chilling moment, it turned its head toward the lens, revealing hollow eyes and a face smeared with grime. I dropped my coffee, the ceramics shattering against the tile. My breath came in short, panic gasps as I replayed the footage over and over. Someone was living in my attic. Not an animal, not a ghost, but a real person. For a moment I considered running straight out of the house. But where would I go? The police. I needed to call the police. My hands trembled as I reached for my phone, my eyes darting toward the ceiling, suddenly hyper-aware of every sound above me. I whispered into the phone, giving my address and explaining the situation as calmly as I could. The operator assured me an officer was on the way, but even as I hung up, I felt trapped. The thought of someone lurking just above me made my skin crawl. Minutes stretched into eternity as I waited for the police to arrive. Every creak in the house sent a jolt of terror through my body. I gripped a kitchen knife, my pulse hammering in my ears. Then, just as I was about to break down, red and blue lights flashed through my windows. The officers wasted no time. They entered my house with their hands on their holsters, nodding for me to stay put. I watched as they pulled down the attic ladder and climbed up, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. The silence that followed was suffocating. Then, a shout rang out, followed by scuffling sounds. My stomach twisted as I heard a thud, then footsteps coming back down the ladder. One of the officers emerged, dragging a man behind him, a gaunt, dirt-covered figure with wild eyes and ragged clothing. The intruder struggled weakly, his thin frame barely putting up a fight. The other officer descended with a stained sleeping bag and a collection of food wrappers. My stomach churned as I realized he had been living above me, stealing my food, listening to me move around my own home. One of the officers turned to me and asked how long I had been hearing noises. I stammered out a response, still staring at the man as he avoided my gaze. The officer nodded grimly and said cases like this weren't as rare as people thought. As they led the man outside, I finally found my voice. How did he get in? My throat was dry, my hands still shaking. The officer pointed to a small vent on the side of the house. He must have crawled in through there. Looks like he's been here for a while. The reality of it hit me like a sledgehammer. Every night, while I had been sleeping, he had been mere feet away, separated by only a thin ceiling. I felt sick, my mind racing with possibilities. Had he ever watched me through the vents? Had he ever stood over me while I slept? The officers assured me they would file a full report and suggested I stay with a friend until I could get the attic properly secured. I nodded, though I wasn't sure I'd ever feel safe in my home again. The thought of returning to that house, knowing what had been lurking above me, made my skin crawl. That night I slept at a friend's house, but sleep didn't come easy. Every sound, every shadow felt like a threat. My mind replayed the footage over and over, the way he had moved, the way he had stared at the camera. I knew I would never forget that face. The next day, I hired a contractor to seal every possible entry point. The vent was replaced with reinforced steel, the attic ladder secured with a heavy lock. I even installed a security system, though it did little to ease my lingering paranoia. Weeks passed, and slowly, life returned to normal. But the fear never truly left me. Sometimes in the dead of night, I'd wake up drenched in sweat, convinced I had heard something above me. My heart would race as I listened, barely daring to breathe. Eventually, I stopped checking the attic. I told myself it was over, that he was gone, that I was safe. But deep down, a part of me would always wonder, had he really been caught the first time? Or was there someone else, still up there, waiting for me to let my guard down? Story 9. The highway stretched out before me, empty except for the occasional flickering road sign. My GPS had been acting strange for the past few miles, rerouting and recalibrating in ways that didn't make sense. I chalked it up to poor signal and kept driving, trusting it to guide me to my motel for the night. The sky was dark, the trees on either side of the road looming like silent watchers. A few miles later, the GPS instructed me to take a left onto a narrow, unmarked road. It looked more like a service path than an actual street, but I hesitated only for a moment before following its lead. The road twisted through dense forest, the pavement soon giving way to gravel and dirt. My headlights cast long shadows across the trees, and a strange unease settled in my chest. The further I went, the less sense any of it made. My GPS had gone eerily silent, no longer announcing turns or estimated arrival times. When I glanced at my phone, I saw that my signal had completely vanished. The only sound was the crunch of gravel under my tires and the low hum of my engine as I crept forward. A sudden realization hit me. I had seen no street signs, no mile markers, no indication that this was even a real road. My gut told me to turn around, but the road was too narrow for a quick U-turn. Just as I began searching for a clearing to reverse, my headlights illuminated something up ahead. A group of men stood in the middle of the road, waiting. I slammed my foot on the brake, my pulse hammering against my ribs. There were at least 5 of them, dressed in dark clothes, their faces hidden in shadow. None of them moved, none of them spoke, but they were all staring at me. A sickening dread spread through my stomach as I gripped the steering wheel tighter, every nerve in my body screaming at me to get out of there. I threw the car into reverse, tires skidding against the loose gravel. The men didn't run toward me, didn't make any sudden moves, but I could see the faint glint of something metallic in one of their hands. My heart pounded as my car struggled to gain traction, the back wheels spinning before finally catching the dirt. I turned sharply, trying to angle myself for a quick escape. Just as I was about to straighten out, my headlights flickered, and for a split second, I thought my car was about to die. The panic clawing at my chest made it hard to think straight, but I forced myself to focus. I didn't care if I hit a tree or tore up the undercarriage. I needed to get away. I pressed down hard on the gas, my car lurching backward as I fought to keep control. One of the men stepped forward, then slowly, deliberately, as if he had all the time in the world. My tires finally found enough grip, and I spun the car around, the back end fishtailing wildly. As I sped away, I caught a glimpse of the man in my rearview mirror. He hadn't stopped walking, his expression unreadable as he watched me disappear down the road. I didn't let up on the gas until I reached the main highway, my entire body trembling. My hands were slick with sweat, my breath coming in shallow gasps as I struggled to make sense of what had just happened. My GPS screen was still frozen, displaying an error message where my route had been. I shut it off and drove blindly, just wanting to put as much distance between me and that road as possible. When I finally saw the glow of a gas station up ahead, I pulled in and parked under the bright overhead lights. My hands were still shaking as I reached for my phone, but my signal had returned. I checked my GPS history, trying to find out what route it had taken me through. There was nothing, no record of the turn, no log of the road I had just escaped from. I asked the clerk inside if he knew anything about the area, but he only gave me a confused look. According to him, there was no road where I claimed to have been. The forest stretched out for miles, untouched and unmarked by any paths. He assured me I must have been mistaken, but I knew what I had seen. I knew there were men waiting there. Back in my car, I locked the doors and tried to calm myself down. My destination was still another hour away, but I wasn't sure I could trust my GPS again. I manually typed in my model's address, double-checking the route before setting off. Every turn I made, I scanned my surroundings, half expecting to see headlights trailing me. When I finally reached my motel, I parked as close to the entrance as possible and hurried inside. My nerves were still raw, my body running on pure adrenaline. The night clerk barely looked up as I checked in, oblivious to the terror that still clung to me. Once inside my room, I bolted the door and sat on the bed, staring at my phone in silence. I thought about calling someone, telling them what had happened, but I wasn't sure what I would even say. There was no proof, no evidence that I had almost driven into something terrible. My GPS had erased the route. The gas station clerk had never heard of the road, and by morning it would all seem like some fevered nightmare. But I knew better. I had seen them waiting for me. My GPS had led me straight to them, and if I hadn't reacted in time, I might not have been so lucky. Lying in bed, I tried to push the thoughts away, but one question remained. What would have happened if I hadn't turned around in time? Story 10. I went for my usual evening jog, the sun dipping below the horizon as the streetlights flickered on. The neighborhood was quiet, the occasional car passing by, but something felt off. A white van was parked a few houses down, its headlights dim, almost as if it were trying not to be noticed. At first I brushed it off, focusing on my pace as I ran along my usual route. The crisp evening air filled my lungs as my shoes pounded against the pavement. But as I turned onto a less busy street, I heard the distinct hum of an engine behind me. Glancing over my shoulder, I noticed the van moving slowly, keeping a steady distance behind me. My stomach twisted, but I tried to ignore it, convincing myself it was just my imagination. However, when I picked up my pace, the van did the same, matching my speed. A cold sweat broke out along my back as my mind raced through my options. The street I was on had few houses, and the nearest main road was a few blocks away. I needed to think fast, but panic was starting to creep in. I decided to test the van's movements, suddenly slowing to a casual walk. The van, too, slowed down, maintaining its distance. My pulse pounded in my ears, and I knew then that I wasn't imagining things. Whoever was in that van was watching me, waiting. Taking a deep breath, I turned a corner and immediately broke into a sprint. My legs burned as I pushed myself forward, desperate to put as much distance between me and the van as possible. But the sound of the engine revving up sent a bolt of fear through me. I could hear the tires screeching slightly as the van sped up again. My heart pounded wildly as I realized it was closing in on me. There was no time to think. I needed to find help, a place to hide, something. Up ahead, I spotted a house with its porch light on. Without hesitation, I bolted toward it, running up the driveway as fast as I could. I banged on the door, my breaths coming in sharp gasps as I glanced over my shoulder. The van had stopped at the edge of the driveway, idling for a few moments. I kept pounding on the door, silently pleading for someone to answer. Just as I was about to scream, the porch light flickered and the door creaked open. A middle-aged woman peeked out, her eyes widening when she saw me. I barely managed to get out the words, my voice shaking as I explained that a van had been following me. Her face turned serious as she pulled me inside, locking the door behind me. We peered through the curtains, watching as the van lingered at the end of the driveway. It sat there for what felt like an eternity before suddenly reversing and speeding off into the night. My body slumped against the wall, relief washing over me in waves. The woman, who introduced herself as Mrs. Turner, handed me a glass of water and let me catch my breath. She insisted on calling the police, and I nodded, still shaken. As she dialed, I replayed everything in my mind, my hands trembling slightly. When the officers arrived, I recounted the entire incident, describing the van as best as I could. They took my statements seriously, nodding as they jotted down notes. One officer mentioned that a similar vehicle had been reported in the area before, following other women on their evening walks or jogs. That revelation sent a chill down my spine. The idea that whoever was in that van had likely done this before, possibly with worse intentions, made my stomach turn. The officers promised to patrol the neighborhood and advised me to be extra cautious in the future. After they left, Miss Turner offered to drive me home, and I gratefully accepted. The ride was quiet, my mind still processing everything that had happened. I knew one thing for certain: I wouldn't be jogging alone in the evenings anymore. That night, sleep didn't come easily. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the van, the way it lurked in the shadows before creeping closer. The sound of its engine still echoed in my ears, making me shudder. The next day, I told a few close friends about what had happened. Their reactions were a mix of horror and concern, and they urged me to file another report if I saw anything suspicious again. It was a terrifying reminder that danger could be lurking even in familiar places. I started making changes to my routine, no longer jogging at night and always letting someone know where I was going. I also carried pepper spray, my grip tightening around it whenever I felt uneasy. The fear lingered, but I refused to let it control me. Weeks passed, and while I tried to move on, the experience stayed with me. I found myself watching every car that passed, my pulse quickening if one slowed down near me. It was exhausting, but I couldn't shake the paranoia that had settled in. One evening, while out with a friend, I spotted a van that looked eerily similar to the one that had followed me. My breath hitched as I grabbed my friend's arm, my eyes locked onto the vehicle. But this time I wasn't alone. We quickly reported it, giving as many details as we could. The police took our call seriously, promising to keep an eye out, though I never found out if they caught the person behind the wheel. Knowing I had taken action made me feel a little stronger. The incident had changed me, making me more cautious, more aware of my surroundings. But it also made me realize the importance of trusting my instincts. If something feels wrong, it probably is, and it's better to act fast than to regret hesitation later. Looking back, I know I was lucky that night. Had I not found that house, had Miss Turner not opened the door in time, things could have ended very differently. The thought alone made my skin crawl, but I refused to let fear define me. From then on, I made a promise to myself. I would never let my guard down again, and I would always be prepared. Because the world wasn't as safe as I once believed. And sometimes, the danger wasn't just in the dark, it was right behind you, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Story 11. I arrived home late in the evening, my hands fumbling in my bag for my keys. The street was quiet, bathed in the dull glow of the streetlights, and the cool night air carried the distant hum of a passing car. I found the key and slid it into the lock, only to realize it wouldn't turn. Confused, I tried again, jiggling the key and applying more pressure. The lock resisted, as if it belonged to a different door entirely. My pulse quickened as I stepped back, glancing up at the familiar windows of my home, their curtains drawn just as I had left them that morning. I checked the key in my palm, running my fingers over its familiar ridges. It was my key, the same one I had used every day. A creeping unease settled in my stomach as I peered through the small window beside the door. Inside, the lights were on, casting a warm glow over the living room. My breath caught in my throat as I saw movement. A man was walking through my home, completely at ease, as if he belonged there. My first thought was that I had been robbed, that a stranger had broken in while I was at work. But he wasn't rummaging through my belongings or stuffing valuables into a bag. He was simply moving through the house, calm and unhurried. I knocked on the door, my heart hammering in my chest. The man paused, turning his head toward the sound, and for a brief moment, our eyes met through the glass. His face was unreadable, but there was something unsettling about the way he stared at me. I reached for my phone and dialed the police with trembling fingers. As I waited for an answer, I kept my eyes on the man, watching his every move. He didn't seem startled or nervous, if anything. He looked mildly annoyed, as if I were the intruder. The dispatcher answered, and I forced myself to speak steadily. I explained the situation, my voice hushed in case the man could hear me. The dispatcher assured me that officers were on their way and advised me to stay outside and keep my distance. As I stood there, I noticed something even more disturbing. The furniture was different. The couch in the living room wasn't mine, and the painting above the fireplace was one I had never seen before. It was as if my house had been replaced with a version that belonged to someone else. I backed away from the door, glancing around to see if any of my neighbors were outside. The houses on my street were dark, their occupants likely already asleep. I was alone in the quiet night, staring at a home that was mine and yet wasn't. Minutes passed, stretching unbearably long, until I saw the blue and red lights of a police car approaching. Relief flooded through me as two officers stepped out, their hands resting on their holsters. I waved them over, trying to keep my breathing steady. I explained everything again, this time with the officers standing beside me. One of them knocked on the door, calling out that it was the police. The man inside hesitated before finally approaching the entrance. When he opened the door, he looked completely at ease. "This is my house," he said simply, his voice calm and unwavering. "I don't know who this person is." I gaped at him, my head spinning. "That's not true. This is my home. I've lived here for years." The officer glanced between us before asking me for identification. My hands were shaking as I pulled out my ID, handing it over. The officer examined it, then turned to the man. "Sir, do you have any identification showing you live here?" The man nodded and stepped back into the house. He returned a moment later with a piece of mail, holding it out for the officer to see. My stomach dropped when I caught sight of the address. It was my house, but the name on the envelope was his. "That's impossible," I whispered, my vision swimming. "That should have my name on it." The officer frowned, shifting uncomfortably. "Mom, are you sure this is the right address?" "Of course I am," I snapped, frustration overtaking my fear. "I have proof inside bills, my lease, personal belongings." The officer turned back to the man. "Would you mind if she steps inside to verify?" The man hesitated, his face unreadable, then nodded. I stepped past him cautiously, my heart pounding as I entered my own home, only it wasn't my home. The layout was the same, but every detail was wrong. The furniture, the pictures on the walls, even the faint scent in the air, nothing belonged to me. I walked toward the kitchen, expecting to see my coffee maker on the counter, my favorite mug in the sink. Instead, there were unfamiliar appliances, different dishes, and a collection of keys hanging on the wall, none of them mine. Panic swelled in my chest as I turned to the officers. "Everything is different. I don't know what's happening, but this isn't right." The man crossed his arms, watching me with an eerie calm. "Maybe you're confused," he said. "Maybe you made a mistake." "No," I whispered, my throat tightening. "I know my own home." One of the officers sighed, lowering his voice. "Mom, is there anyone we can call for you? A family member? A friend?" Anger flared through me. "I don't need anyone to call. I need you to believe me. This was my home this morning. Something isn't right." "Right." The officers exchanged glances, clearly uncertain. "We'll file a report, but from what we can see, there's no sign of a break-in and he has documentation." I turned back to the man, studying his face. He still looked calm, almost sympathetic, but there was something else lurking beneath his expression. A secret. A knowledge that I wasn't meant to understand. I stepped outside, my mind whirling. The police left after advising me to go somewhere safe for the night. I stood on the sidewalk, staring at the house that used to be mine, now occupied by someone else. As I walked away, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had slipped into a different version of reality. That somewhere, In another place, my real home still existed, but I was no longer part of it. Story 12. Babysitting for the Parkers was usually easy. Their son, Noah, was 6 years old, quiet and well-behaved. The house was large but cozy, nestled at the end of a long driveway surrounded by tall trees. I had watched him a few times before, and nothing strange had ever happened. That night, after putting Noah to bed, I settled on the couch with a movie. The baby monitor sat beside me, its small screen glowing in the dim light. Outside, the wind rustled through the trees, making the branches scratch against the windows. The house felt still, almost too quiet, but I told myself it was just my imagination. As I scrolled through my phone, a message popped up from Mrs. Parker. My stomach tensed as I read it, my fingers tightening around the device. It was a simple instruction, but something about it sent a shiver down my spine. I stared at the words for a long moment, feeling the air around me grow heavier. A slow, deliberate knock echoed through the house. My breath caught in my throat as I turned toward the front door. The knock came again, louder this time, rattling the door in its frame. I stayed frozen, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. The message from Mrs. Parker replayed in my mind, and I tightened my grip on my phone. I forced myself to stay seated, not daring to even peek through the peephole. Whoever was outside knocked once more, then went silent. The quiet stretched on for too long, making my skin crawl. I glanced at the baby monitor, half expecting to see something moving in Noah's room, but the screen showed only his small, sleeping form. A feeling of unease coiled in my stomach as I listened for any sign of movement outside. The trees swayed, their shadows shifting across the floor, but nothing else stirred. Just when I started to think the person had left, the doorknob rattled violently. A sharp gasp escaped my lips as I pressed myself deeper into the couch. Whoever was outside wasn't just knocking anymore, they were trying to get in. My pulse raced as I clenched my hands into fists, unsure of what to do. The locks held, but I didn't feel safe. My mind raced with possibilities, each one worse than the last. Was it a stranger? Someone the Parkers knew? Or was it just a prank? The silence that followed was even more unnerving, stretching out until it became unbearable. I forced myself to move, creeping toward the window as quietly as possible. My hands trembled as I lifted a sliver of the curtain, peering outside. The porch was empty, the front yard stretching into darkness, but something felt wrong. I could sense that I wasn't alone. A chill ran down my spine as I caught movement near the tree line. A figure stood just beyond the glow of the porch light, barely visible between the shadows. They didn't move, didn't step forward or retreat. They just stood there, watching. I shut the curtain, my breathing shallow as I backed away. My fingers hovered over my phone, debating whether to call the police. But then I remembered Noah upstairs, asleep and unaware. If I panicked, I might wake him, and that thought terrified me even more. Another knock came, softer this time, almost patient. It was as if whoever was out there knew I was inside, waiting. My stomach twisted as I pressed my back against the wall, wishing the night would just end. Time seemed to stretch, each second dragging on painfully slow. The minutes passed, and the knocking finally stopped. The house was eerily silent again, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I forced myself to check the baby monitor again, relieved to see Noah still safe in bed. But then, something shifted on the screen. A shadow passed over the camera, just for a second. My breath hitched as I stared, waiting to see it again. The nursery door was closed. I had shut it myself, but now it looked slightly open. My hands shook as I grabbed the nearest object, a heavy candle holder, and crept upstairs. The hallway felt longer than I remembered, stretching endlessly before me. I held my breath as I reached Noah's door, pushing it open slowly. The room was dark, save for the faint blue glow from the monitor, casting eerie shapes on the walls. Noah was still asleep, his small form rising and falling with each breath. But the closet door was ajar, just enough to make my stomach drop. I knew it had been closed when I put him to bed. My grip tightened on the candle holder as I reached for the light switch. The bulb flickered before steadying, illuminating the room in a dull glow. I swallowed hard and stepped closer to the closet, my ears straining for any sound. The air inside felt colder, the shadows deeper, but there was nothing there. Just an empty space filled with neatly stacked toys. I let out a shaky breath and turned back to Noah, brushing his hair gently to reassure myself. Whatever had been outside, whatever had made my skin crawl, was gone now. At least, that's what I told myself as I closed the door and sat beside his bed. I stayed awake until the Parkers returned, unable to shake the lingering unease. When they walked in, Mrs. Parker gave me a questioning look, noticing my pale face. I hesitated before telling them everything, my voice barely above a whisper. Mr. Parker's expression darkened as he exchanged a glance with his wife. There was a pause, heavy and filled with unspoken words. Then Mrs. Parker finally spoke, her voice quiet but firm. They had been receiving strange knocks at night for the past week. They thought it was nothing, just harmless pranks from kids in the neighborhood. But the look in Mr. Parker's eyes told me he didn't believe that anymore. I gathered my things quickly, ready to leave, but as I stepped outside, I hesitated. The trees stood motionless, the night calm and undisturbed. But deep in my gut, I knew someone had been there, watching, waiting. And the worst part, I couldn't shake the feeling that they weren't done yet. Story 13. The car was a steel and old sedan with a few scratches, but the engine purred like new. I had bought it off a guy in a hurry to get rid of it, his price too good to pass up. The only odd thing was the trunk. It was locked, and he claimed he had lost the key. At first, I didn't think much of it. People lose keys all the time, and I figured I could have a locksmith take care of it later. But the more I drove the car, the more I found myself wondering about that trunk and what might be inside. After a few days, curiosity got the best of me. I tried everything, wiggling the lock, pulling at the edges, even attempting to pick it myself. Nothing worked, so I finally decided to force it open with a crowbar. The trunk groaned as the metal bent under pressure, the lock finally giving way with a sharp snap. A foul, overwhelming stench hit me immediately, so strong that I gagged and stumbled back. My hands trembled as I lifted the trunk lid all the way. Inside, a large black garbage bag sat crumpled against the side, its plastic stretched tight over something irregularly shaped. My gut twisted as I reached for it, my fingers hesitating over the damp, sticky surface. When I finally tore it open, the sight sent me reeling. A body, curled and bound, lay stiff inside the bag. The skin had turned an unnatural shade, bloated and sickly, as if it had been decaying for days. My breath came in sharp gasps as I scrambled away from the car, my mind struggling to process what I had just seen. I had to call the police, but my hands were shaking too hard to dial. My thoughts raced. Who was this? How did they end up in my trunk? Had the previous owner done this? Had I just bought a car that was part of something horrifying? Finally, I managed to call, my voice barely steady as I reported what I had found. The dispatcher's tone turned serious, asking me to stay where I was. Minutes stretched into eternity before sirens pierced the air, and soon officers swarmed my driveway. One of them took one look inside the trunk and grimaced. They quickly roped off the area, pushing me back as forensics arrived to process the scene. I felt like I was trapped in a nightmare, watching strangers handle the gruesome discovery from a distance. They took me in for questioning, my head still spinning as I sat in the small, sterile room at the station. They asked about the man who sold me the car, what I knew about him, where I had met him. I answered as best as I could, but the details were blurry, unimportant at the time of the sale. The detectives weren't saying much, their expressions unreadable. One of them left the room, returning minutes later with a grim look. "We ran the plates," he said. "This car was reported stolen a month ago." My stomach dropped. The seller had never mentioned that, never given me any reason to suspect something was wrong. But now, everything about the deal felt off: the rushed sale, the missing trunk key, the way he had barely looked me in the eye. The detectives kept me there for hours, piecing together whatever they could. They showed me a photograph of a missing person, a woman in her mid-30s, last seen 2 weeks ago. The weight in my gut grew heavier when they confirmed the body in my trunk was hers. They needed to find the man who sold me the car, but my description was vague. I had paid in cash, leaving no paper trail. The only thing I had was the location where we met, an empty lot outside of town. Days passed in a blur. My car, now a crime scene, was impounded for investigation. The police kept in touch, but updates were few. I couldn't sleep, haunted by the image of that lifeless body, wondering what kind of horror I had unknowingly driven around with. Then, a break came. Surveillance footage from a nearby gas station showed the man who had sold me the car. The police tracked him down, arresting him at a rundown motel a few towns over. His name was Eric Mathers, and he had a long record of violent offenses. The details that followed only made things worse. The woman had been reported missing after failing to show up to work. Her friends had been searching for her, unaware that she had been discarded in the trunk of a car now sitting in my driveway. Mathers refused to talk, but the evidence was overwhelming. DNA, fibers, surveillance footage, all of it tied him to the crime. The only thing he wouldn't reveal was why. That part I would never know. Even after the case was closed, I couldn't shake the horror of what had happened. I had bought a car without questioning its past, unknowingly taking possession of something much darker than I ever could have imagined. No matter how many times I told myself it wasn't my fault, I still felt the weight of it. I never got the car back, not that I wanted to. The police kept it for evidence, and I moved on, though the experience left me wary. Every time I see an old, abandoned car, I wonder what secrets it holds. And no matter how good a deal seems, I will never buy a used car without checking the trunk first. Story 14. I had been talking to him for a couple of weeks before agreeing to meet in person. His profile was well put together, his messages were charming, and he seemed genuinely interested in me. We decided on a casual dinner at his place since he claimed to be a great cook. I was hesitant at first, but convinced myself it would be fine as long as I stayed alert. When I arrived, his apartment looked normal, clean, well decorated, and nothing out of the ordinary. He greeted me with an easy smile, and I felt a little more at ease. The smell of food filled the air, and he guided me to the dining table where a meal was already set. I told myself I had been overly cautious for no reason. We ate and talked, and everything felt natural at first. He was attentive, asking me questions about my life, laughing at my jokes, and sharing interesting stories. But as the night went on, I started noticing little things that made me uneasy. The way he stared a little too long when I answered a question, or how he repeated my words under his breath like he was memorizing them. At one point, I glanced at my phone, noticing how late it had gotten. I mentioned I should probably head home soon, but his expression changed. His smile remained, but his eyes darkened slightly as he leaned forward. "So soon?" he asked. We're having such a great time." I forced a polite smile and stood up, grabbing my bag. "Yeah, it's been fun, but I have an early morning," I said, trying to keep my tone light. I walked toward the door, expecting him to follow and let me out. Instead, I heard a quiet click behind me. I turned, my heart dropping as I saw him standing by the door, his hand on the lock. The smile was still on his face, but it felt different now. It wasn't warm or friendly, it was knowing. A quiet kind of confidence that sent a chill through me. "Why are you in such a rush?" he asked softly. I thought we were getting along. His voice was calm, too calm, and I felt my pulse hammering in my throat. I forced a laugh, trying to act like I wasn't unnerved. "I really do need to go," I said, shifting slightly toward the door. "I had a great time, though." My fingers twitched toward the handle, but he didn't move away. Instead, he let out a slow sigh and tilted his head. "You're acting like I'm some kind of threat," he said, his tone almost playful. "I just want to spend more time with you. What's wrong with that?" The way he phrased it made it sound so reasonable, but every instinct in my body screamed at me that something was very wrong. I took a slow breath, forcing myself to stay calm. "I appreciate that, but I really do have to go," I said, keeping my voice even. "Maybe we can meet up again another time." I hoped giving him an out would make him step aside. He didn't. Instead, he laughed softly, shaking his head. "You don't get it, do you?" he murmured. "I picked you for a reason. You're different." His fingers tapped idly against the doorframe, like he was considering something. I swallowed hard, my mind racing. I needed to get out, but he was between me and the door, and I had no idea what he was capable of. My phone was still in my bag, and I didn't want to make any sudden moves. Keeping my expression neutral, I took a step back. "Look, I'm flattered, but you're making me uncomfortable," I said firmly. "Please move." My voice was steady, but my hands were shaking. He let out a slow exhale, his eyes studying me. "You don't have to be afraid," he said. "I just want to keep talking." The way he said it made my skin crawl, like I was overreacting, like I should be grateful. I forced another step back, putting more space between us. "I need to go," I repeated, my voice sharper this time. I glanced toward the nearest window, considering if I could get to it in time. His smile faded slightly, and his fingers curled into a fist. "That's a shame," he murmured. "I thought you'd be different." His voice was almost disappointed, like I had let him down. My pulse pounded as I realized I had seconds to act. Before he could say anything else, I yanked my phone from my bag and hit the emergency dial. As soon as I did, his expression changed entirely. His jaw clenched, and for a split second, I saw something darker flicker across his face. Then, just as quickly, he sighed and stepped away from the door. "Fine," he said flatly. "If you're going to be dramatic about it, go." I didn't hesitate. I grabbed the handle, unlocked it, and stepped out as quickly as I could without running. I kept my breathing steady, not looking back until I was in the hallway. The door shut behind me, but I knew he was still watching. I hurried to the elevator, my heart still pounding, my hands shaking as I clutched my phone. When I reached the lobby, I told the front desk I needed a ride home immediately. They must have seen the look on my face because they didn't ask questions. The whole way home, I kept replaying everything in my mind. The shift in his voice, the way he blocked the door, the way he made me feel like I was being unreasonable for wanting to leave. I knew without a doubt that if I hadn't acted fast, things could have ended very differently. I blocked his number as soon as I got home, deleting the app and locking every door in my apartment. But even after I was safe inside, I couldn't shake the feeling that he had let me go too easily, like he had been testing me, and I had barely passed. Story 15. The first time I noticed him, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. The faint glow of the street lamp cast long shadows outside my house, and at first, he just seemed like another part of the darkness. But then I saw the glint of his eyes through the holes of his ski mask, fixed on me through the window. My breath caught in my throat as I realized he wasn't moving, just standing there, watching. A cold chill crept up my spine as I forced myself to look away. Maybe if I ignored him, he would leave, just some creep playing a prank. I reached for my phone, debating whether to call the police, but something held me back. It felt ridiculous to report a man just standing there, doing nothing but staring. Minutes passed, then an hour, yet he didn't move. Every time I glanced out, he was still there, motionless, like a statue frozen in the night. My skin prickled with unease as I turned off the lights, hoping he would think I had gone to bed. But even in the dark, I could feel his presence, an invisible weight pressing against my chest. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed my phone and dialed, my voice low and strained as I told the dispatcher what was happening. They assured me an officer would be sent over, but as I hung up, a terrible thought crossed my mind. What if he left before they arrived, disappearing into the night like he was never there? I peeked through the curtain again, half expecting him to be gone. But he wasn't. He was still there, standing as still as before, as if he knew I had called for help. My stomach twisted as I realized he wanted me to see him, to know that he wasn't in a hurry to leave. He was waiting for something. The minutes dragged by, each one stretching into eternity. My heart pounded against my ribs as I listened for any sound, any sign of movement. Then, at last, the distant wail of sirens broke through the silence, cutting through the night like a blade. Relief flooded my chest as I watched a patrol car pull up in front of my house. 2 officers stepped out, their flashlights scanning the yard. My hands trembled as I unlocked the door and waved them over, trying to keep my voice steady. "He was right there," I said, pointing to the spot near the window. But when I turned back, he was gone. My stomach dropped as the officers exchanged glances, their expressions unreadable. One of them stepped forward, shining his light around the yard, while the other turned to me. "Can you describe him?" he asked, his voice calm but firm. I swallowed hard, my mind scrambling for details beyond the mask and the way he just stood there. "He was tall, I think," I said, wearing a dark jacket, ski mask, just watching me. He didn't move for hours. My voice wavered as I forced myself to say the words out loud. The officer nodded, glancing toward his partner, who had started searching the area. The tension in the air was thick, pressing against my skin like a warning. I expected them to reassure me, to say it was probably nothing. Instead, the officer sighed and looked me straight in the eye. "We've seen him before," he said, his tone unreadable. A shiver ran down my spine as his words sank in. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. The officer hesitated for a moment before answering. "There have been reports of a man matching this description in the area. Always outside windows, always watching." I felt my stomach churn as a wave of nausea hit me. "Did he ever do anything?" My voice was shaky, barely holding together. The officer didn't answer right away, but the way his jaw tightened told me enough. "He never breaks in," he finally said. "Never leaves anything behind, just watches. But he always comes back." The words felt like ice spreading through my veins. I wrapped my arms around myself, trying to shake the growing sense of dread. The second officer returned, shaking his head. "No sign of him," he said, "but he was definitely here." tracks in the grass. My breath hitched at the confirmation, the undeniable proof that I hadn't imagined it. He had been there, and he had left just before the police arrived. I forced myself to take a deep breath. "What should I do?" I asked, my voice barely steady. The first officer's expression softened slightly. "Keep your doors and windows locked. If he comes back, call us immediately." He handed me his card, the weight of it feeling heavier than it should. I watched as they drove off, their headlights disappearing into the night. The house felt different now, like the walls weren't enough to keep the outside world away. Every shadow seemed to stretch too far. Every creak in the floorboards made my pulse jump. I barely slept that night, jolting awake at every imagined sound. The next day, I installed new locks, double-checked every window, and even set up cameras around the house. But no matter how much I tried to feel safe, the thought kept gnawing at the back of my mind. The police knew him. They had seen him before, and they knew he would come back. Days passed, then weeks, and there was no sign of him. I told myself it was over, that maybe he had moved on to somewhere else. But every night, as I passed by the window, I found myself glancing outside, searching for a shadow that wasn't supposed to be there. Then, one night I woke up with a start, a deep, uneasy feeling settling in my chest. The room was silent, but something felt off. Slowly, I turned my head toward the window, my heart pounding in my ears. And there he was, standing in the same spot as before, staring through the glass. This time I didn't wait. My hands fumbled for my phone as I called the police, my voice barely able to form the words. He didn't move, didn't react, just stood there, as if he had all the time in the world. By the time the officers arrived, he was gone again. Just like before, only footprints remained, leading off into the night. The same officer from before met my eyes, his expression grim. "We'll do everything we can," he said. But even as he spoke, I could tell he didn't believe this was over. And neither did I. Story 16. I wasn't expecting any deliveries that night, so when the knock came at my door just past midnight, I hesitated before answering. My apartment building was quiet at that hour, the usual sounds of my neighbors settling in for the night long gone. Another knock came, this time lighter, almost hesitant. Cautiously, I approached the door and looked through the peephole. A package sat on my doorstep, but no one was there. The hallway was empty, the only movement coming from the flickering overhead light casting uneven shadows along the walls. I opened the door just enough to pull the package inside. It was a medium-sized cardboard box, sealed tightly with clear packing tape. The shipping label was printed, but something about it seemed off. My apartment number was scrawled across the top in thick black marker, yet the name on the package wasn't mine. A strange unease settled over me as I ran my fingers over the label. I didn't recognize the name, and the return address was smudged, barely legible. Something about the whole thing felt wrong, but I couldn't quite put my finger on why. I set the package down on my coffee table and debated what to do. It wasn't uncommon for deliveries to get mixed up in the building, but this felt deliberate. The label looked official, yet someone had manually written my apartment number over it. I grabbed my phone and searched the name on the label, hoping it belonged to someone in the building. No results came up, not even a social media profile. That made no sense. Everyone left some kind of digital footprint. Whoever this was, they either didn't exist or didn't want to be found. A chill crept down my spine as I considered my options. I could leave the package outside and forget about it, but something about the way it had been delivered made me uneasy. I could hear my own breathing in the silence of my apartment, the weight of the unknown pressing down on me. Curiosity won over caution, and I grabbed a knife to cut through the packing tape. The blade slid easily through the layers of adhesive, and I hesitated for just a moment before peeling back the flaps. Inside, layers of crumpled newspaper concealed whatever was hidden within. Slowly, I reached inside and pulled out the contents. My stomach dropped. Resting inside the box was a single Polaroid photo, slightly curled at the edges. It was a picture of my apartment door, taken from somewhere in the hallway. I stared at the image, my mind racing. The angle suggested it had been taken recently, maybe even earlier that night. The thought sent a jolt of fear through me. Someone had stood outside my apartment, watching, photographing, and then leaving this package behind. My hands trembled as I rifled through the rest of the box, but it was empty except for the newspaper stuffing. No note, no explanation, just that single, unsettling photo. My first instinct was to check my door again, making sure it was locked. I even slid the chain across, suddenly hyper-aware of every sound outside. I grabbed my phone again, debating whether to call the police. What would I even tell them? A mislabeled package with a creepy photo inside wasn't exactly an emergency. Still, I felt watched, exposed in my own home. I decided to check my security camera. I had a small doorbell camera installed, more for convenience than anything, but now I was grateful for it. Pulling up the footage, I rewound to the time when the package had appeared. The video showed the hallway bathed in dim, flickering light. At exactly 12:04 a.m., a figure stepped into view, hood pulled low over their face. They moved quickly, placing the package at my door before knocking twice. Then, without hesitation, they turned and walked away, disappearing down the hall. I paused the footage and tried to make out any details, but the quality wasn't great. The person's clothing was dark and unremarkable, their face hidden beneath the hood. They never looked up, never hesitated. It was as if they knew exactly what they were doing. My heartbeat pounded in my ears as I tried to figure out what this meant. Was this some kind of prank? A warning? And why me? The fact that they had written my apartment number by hand meant they had done it deliberately. Sleep was out of the question after that. I sat on my couch, phone in hand, waiting for something else to happen. Every creak in the building made me jump. Every shadow outside my window seemed to stretch toward me. By morning I was exhausted but still on edge. I took the package down to the apartment office, hoping they might know something. The building manager, an older woman named Carol, frowned as she looked it over. "No one by this name lives here," she said, flipping the package in her hands. "And we don't allow late-night deliveries. The doors lock after 10. That only deepened my unease. "Someone brought it here after midnight," I said. "They knocked and left it at my door." Carol's expression darkened, and she shook her head. "If I were you, I'd throw this out and forget about it," she said, sliding it back toward me. "People get into weird stuff. Best not to invite trouble." I left the office feeling even worse than before. Carol wasn't wrong, but forgetting about it wasn't an option. That night, I double-checked my locks and kept my curtains drawn. My stomach churned every time I thought about that photo. Over the next few days, nothing else happened. No more packages, no more knocks in the middle of the night. I started convincing myself it had been a mistake, some strange prank or mix-up. But just when I began to let my guard down, something else arrived. This time it wasn't a package. Slipped under my door was another Polaroid, and when I picked it up, my blood turned to ice. It was another picture of my door, only this one had been taken from inside my apartment. I stumbled back, nearly dropping the photo as my breath caught in my throat. Someone had been inside. Someone had stood in my living room, looking out at my door, and left this behind as proof. I grabbed my keys and ran out without looking back. I didn't care where I went, I just knew I couldn't stay. Whoever had sent that package wasn't done with me yet, and I wasn't about to stick around to find out what they wanted next. Story 17. The apartment complex I lived in wasn't anything special, but it was safe. At least I had always thought so. I had lived there for almost 3 years without any problems. That changed when the building manager knocked on my door one morning, his face serious. He asked if I had noticed anything strange lately. I frowned, shaking my head, but something about his tone made my stomach tighten. He hesitated for a moment, then told me they had caught something on the security cameras. My pulse quickened as he explained. For the past week, a man had been trying my door handle every night. My skin went cold as I processed his words. I wanted to believe he was mistaken, that maybe it was someone who had the wrong apartment, but the way he looked at me told me otherwise. He invited me to the office to see the footage for myself. My hands were clammy as I followed him down the hallway, my mind racing. I tried to think of who it could be, but no one came to mind. I didn't have enemies, and I kept to myself. Inside the office, he pulled up the footage, and my stomach dropped. The first clip was from 5 nights ago, just after 2 a.m. The camera at the end of the hall showed a man walking toward my door. He moved slowly, his head down as if he was trying not to be noticed. He reached my door and hesitated before gripping the handle. He jiggled it once, then twice. When it didn't budge, he stepped back, looking up and down the hallway. Then, just as calmly as he arrived, he turned and walked away. The next clip was the following night. Same time, same routine. My throat went dry as I watched him try the handle again. I hadn't heard anything that night, hadn't even thought to check my door. The thought made my skin crawl. The building manager clicked through more clips, each one showing the same thing. Every night for a week, the man had come back. Every night he had tried my door. And every night he had walked away when he found it locked. I forced myself to study him closely. He was tall, wearing dark clothes and a hood that obscured most of his face. But something about the way he moved made me feel like he wasn't a stranger. There was an eerie familiarity, like I had seen him before but couldn't place where. The manager asked if I wanted to file a police report. My first instinct was to say yes, but I hesitated. He hadn't broken in, hadn't actually done anything illegal. Would the police even take it seriously? I swallowed hard and told him I needed to think. That night, I double-checked my locks before going to bed. I pushed a chair under the doorknob, even though I knew it wouldn't do much. Every creak in the apartment made my heart jump. Sleep didn't come easily. At 2 a.m., I was still awake. My breath was shallow as I lay in bed listening. Then I heard it. A soft, barely audible rattle at the door. My stomach clenched. I didn't move, barely even breathed, straining to hear. The handle jiggled again. I reached for my phone with shaking hands, my mind screaming at me to call the police. But before I could, the noise stopped. I waited, my ears ringing in the silence. After a few minutes, I forced myself to get up. I crept to the peephole, my pulse hammering. The hallway was empty. My hand hovered over the door, but I didn't dare open it. I backed away, my skin crawling. Whoever he was, he had been there, and now he knew I was home. The next morning, I went straight to the building manager and told him to call the police. An officer arrived later that day, taking my statement and reviewing the footage. He nodded as he watched, but didn't seem overly concerned. He asked if I had any idea who it could be. I shook my head, frustrated that I couldn't give him more. He told me to be careful, lock my doors, and call if anything happened again. I could tell he didn't think much would come of it. That night, I sat in my dark apartment, waiting. I needed to know if he would come back. Hours passed, and I nearly convinced myself that he'd been scared off. Then, at exactly 2 a.m., I heard it again. The handle rattling. This time, I didn't hesitate. I grabbed my phone and called 911, whispering as I told the dispatcher what was happening. My hands were shaking as I stayed near the door, my heart racing. I heard movement in the hall, a soft shuffle, then silence. Minutes felt like hours. Then, footsteps loud, hurried. Someone running. I pressed myself against the door, listening. The dispatcher told me officers were on the way, but by the time they arrived, the hallway was empty. The security footage showed the man again, but this time something was different. Before he ran, he had bent down and placed something on the floor outside my door. My stomach turned as the officer picked up the small folded piece of paper. Inside was a single message scrawled in uneven handwriting. "See you soon." My hands turned ice cold as I read it. The officer exchanged a glance with the building manager before turning to me. His expression was grim. That night I didn't sleep. I sat in my living room, every light on, my heart pounding at every sound. The police said they would increase patrols, but deep down, I knew it wouldn't help. This man wasn't just randomly trying doors, he was after me. The next day I packed a bag and went to stay with a friend. I didn't tell many people what had happened. I just knew I couldn't stay there any longer. My lease was almost up, and I decided I wouldn't renew it. A few days later, the building manager called. The man hadn't come back. It was as if he had disappeared. But I couldn't shake the feeling that he was still watching, still waiting. I knew better than to believe it was over. Even now, in a new apartment in a different part of town, I still check my locks 3 times before bed. I still wake up in the middle of the night, listening for sounds that aren't there. And sometimes, when I least expect it, I wonder if he ever really stopped watching me. Story 18. The rain had just started when I slid into the backseat of the Uber, relieved to be out of the cold. The driver didn't acknowledge me, not even a nod, as I settled in and buckled my seatbelt. His face was hidden beneath the shadow of a baseball cap, and he kept his hands rigid on the wheel. The car smelled faintly of air freshener, but there was something else beneath it, a stale, unpleasant scent I couldn't quite place. I glanced at my phone to check the estimated arrival time. It was a short ride, maybe 15 minutes at most, and I was exhausted after a long night out with friends. The streetlights blurred against the wet windshield as the car pulled away from the curb. The driver still hadn't spoken, but that wasn't unusual. Some drivers preferred silence, and I didn't mind. A few minutes in, I noticed something strange. The route on my phone showed we should have taken a right turn at the last intersection, but we had gone straight instead. At first, I thought maybe he was just avoiding traffic. But as I watched, he took another turn that didn't match the GPS directions. "Hey, I think you missed the turn," I said, leaning forward slightly. He didn't react. His hands tightened on the steering wheel, knuckles pale against the dim dashboard lights. I swallowed, trying to keep my voice light. Maybe the GPS is rerouting, but it looks like we're off track. Nothing, not a single word. The car kept moving, turning onto a darker road with fewer streetlights. My heart picked up speed as I checked my location again. We were heading in the opposite direction of my destination. "Excuse me," I said, louder this time. "Can you hear me? You're going the wrong way." Still no response. He didn't even glance at me through the rearview mirror. My fingers curled around the door handle, but the locks were engaged. I tapped the lock button on my door, but it didn't budge. Child lock. My stomach dropped. "Listen, I need to get out," I said, my voice shaking. "Just pull over right here." The driver's grip on the wheel stayed firm. The car accelerated slightly as we passed an empty parking lot. I reached for my phone and quickly pulled up the app to report the ride. My screen loaded slowly, the signal weak in this part of town. My breath hitched when I realized something: he had turned off the Uber tracking. My location wasn't updating. Panic surged through my chest. I forced myself to stay calm, even as every instinct screamed at me to do something. I sent a quick message to my friend, dropping my last known location and a brief message: "Driver isn't stopping. Call me." The car slowed at an intersection, and I saw my chance. The doors were locked, but the window, maybe I could break it, force my way out. My eyes darted around for anything I could use: my bag, my phone, the heel of my shoe. Before I could act, the driver suddenly turned his head, just slightly enough for me to see his profile. His lips moved for the first time since I got in. "Don't." That single word sent a jolt of terror through me. His voice was low, almost a whisper, but it carried weight. He knew what I was thinking. He had been watching me. I forced my voice to stay steady. "Where are we going?" He didn't answer. The rain hit the windshield harder, and the wipers moved in slow, deliberate arcs. My phone vibrated. My friend was calling. I answered quickly, putting it on speaker. "Hey, where are you?" My friend's voice was sharp, laced with concern. The driver's fingers twitched on the wheel. He kept driving, but I saw his jaw tighten. He was listening. I don't know," I said, my voice shaking. "We're not on the right road." What do you mean?" I told him to stop, but he won't. Silence. Then my friend's voice turned hard. "I'm calling the police. Stay on the line." The driver inhaled sharply. Then, as if a switch had flipped, he suddenly turned down a side street, tires splashing through puddles. My phone screen lit up again with a notification: "Emergency call initiated." I hadn't pressed anything, but my friend must have. The driver exhaled through his nose, gripping the wheel so tightly his fingers looked strained. Then, without warning, the car slowed to a stop. My heart pounded. He reached for something under the seat, and I braced myself to fight. But instead of a weapon, he simply unlocked the doors. "Get out," he muttered. I didn't hesitate. I shoved the door open and stumbled out onto the wet pavement, my knees nearly buckling. My friend was still on the line, yelling my name, but I couldn't process it. The car idled for a moment longer before the driver pulled away, disappearing down the street without another word. I stood there in the rain, gasping for breath, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Within minutes, my friend arrived, pulling up fast with her hazards blinking. She jumped out and ran to me, grabbing my arms. "What the hell happened? Are you okay?" I nodded numbly, my body still trembling. "I don't know what he wanted," I whispered, "but I don't think it was just a wrong turn." The police arrived shortly after, but by then, the driver was long gone. When they pulled up the Uber records, the ride had been erased. No trip history, no driver information. It was as if I had never gotten into that car. For weeks, I kept looking over my shoulder, afraid I'd see that car again. But I never did. The memory of his voice, that single word, "don't," he still lingers in my mind. I stopped using rideshare apps after that. I don't think I ever will again. Story 19. The road was nearly empty as I drove home late that night. The highway stretched ahead, dark and endless, flanked by thick trees on either side. My headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating only the pavement and the occasional road sign. It had been a long day, and I was eager to get home and collapse into bed. As I rounded a bend, something in the middle of the road caught my eye. A man was lying there, clutching his chest, as if he was in pain. His body was sprawled awkwardly, one arm reaching toward the sky, his face contorted in distress. My heart pounded as I slowed the car, my instincts warring between caution and concern. I flicked on my hazard lights and inched closer, my hands gripping the wheel tightly. The man didn't move except for the shallow rise and fall of his chest. He looked young, maybe in his 30s, dressed in jeans and a dark hoodie. A bad accident? A heart attack? The questions raced through my mind as I put the car in park. I rolled down my window slightly, hesitating before stepping out. "Hey, are you okay?" My voice echoed into the night, but he didn't answer. He just twitched slightly, his fingers curling against his chest. Something about it felt off, but I couldn't just leave him there. I took a deep breath and opened the door, stepping onto the cold asphalt. The air smelled like damp earth, the recent rain leaving a misty haze over the road. As I approached, I kept a few feet of distance between us, my every sense on high alert. "Sir, do you need help?" I asked again. Then movement. Not from him, but from the trees. A rustling sound, barely audible, sent a shiver down my spine. My eyes darted to the tree line just beyond the road, and my breath caught in my throat. 3 figures stepped out from the shadows, their silhouettes barely illuminated by my headlights. Panic surged through me as my body tensed. The figures were all men, dressed in dark clothing, moving toward me with slow, deliberate steps. My mind screamed at me to run, but my feet felt rooted to the pavement. The man on the ground suddenly stopped clutching his chest and sat up, his face now eerily calm. I took a step back, every muscle in my body screaming for me to get back in the car. The 3 men moved closer, their expressions unreadable in the dim light. My pulse thundered in my ears as I glanced toward my car, calculating how many steps it would take to get there. One of them spoke, his voice low and steady. "You should have kept driving." The casual way he said it sent ice through my veins. The man on the ground was now on his feet, brushing off his jeans as if he had never been in distress. My stomach dropped as I realized exactly what this was. A setup. They had been waiting for someone like me, someone who would stop to help. I turned on my heel and bolted toward my car, my heart slamming against my ribs. My breath came in sharp gasps as I heard their footsteps pounding behind me, closing in too fast. I lunged for the driver's side door, yanking it open just as a hand grabbed the back of my jacket. I let out a choked yell, twisting violently out of their grip. My fingers fumbled for the door handle as I threw myself inside and slammed the door shut. Hands banged against the window as I jammed my key into the ignition. One of the men tried to yank the door open, but I had locked it just in time. My hands trembled as I gripped the wheel, my foot slamming down on the gas. The tires screeched as the car lurched forward. In the rearview mirror, I saw them standing in the road, watching as I sped away. My chest heaved with frantic breaths, adrenaline surging through my veins. I didn't slow down. my only thought being to put as much distance between me and them as possible. A few miles down the road, I finally forced myself to pull over. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely keep them on the wheel. I reached for my phone, my fingers numb as I dialed 911. The dispatcher answered, and I hurriedly explained what had happened. My voice wavered as I recounted the details: the fake injury, the men in the trees, the way they had chased me. The operator remained calm, asking for my location and assuring me that an officer would be sent out to check the area. I sat in my car, gripping the wheel tightly as I tried to steady my breathing. The longer I sat there, the more I realized how close I had come to something truly terrible. If I had hesitated just a moment longer, if my car hadn't started in time, I didn't want to think about what could have happened. Eventually, flashing blue and red lights appeared in my rearview mirror. A police cruiser pulled up behind me, and an officer stepped out. I got out of the car, still feeling unsteady, as I relayed everything again. The officer nodded grimly, taking notes as he listened. "We've had reports of incidents like this before," he admitted. "People pretending to be injured to lure drivers out of their cars. You were lucky to get away." A chill ran through me as I processed his words. This wasn't an isolated event. It had happened before and would likely happen again. I swallowed hard, feeling sick at the thought of someone else falling for the same trap. The officer promised they would patrol the area and look for the men, but I doubted they would still be there. People like that didn't stick around once their plan failed. He advised me to always call for help instead of stopping in a situation like that. I nodded, knowing I wouldn't forget that advice anytime soon. As I got back into my car, exhaustion hit me all at once. I drove home in silence, my hands still tight on the wheel, my mind replaying every second of what had happened. That night, I double-checked every lock in my house before going to bed. Sleep didn't come easily, my mind unable to shake the image of those men standing in the road, watching as I drove away. I knew I had escaped, but the fear still lingered. The next morning, I checked the news, hoping for an update. There was nothing. No reports of arrests, no warnings about what had happened. It was as if the incident had never occurred. But I knew the truth. They were still out there, waiting for the next person to stop. And I knew that next time, someone might not be as lucky as I was. Story 20. The subway car was nearly empty when I stepped inside, the overhead lights flickering slightly as the doors slid shut behind me. The late hour meant only a handful of people were scattered throughout the car, most with their heads down, lost in their own worlds. I took a seat near the middle, gripping the cold metal pole beside me as the train lurched forward. The rhythmic clatter of the tracks filled the silence, a steady hum that usually soothed me. I glanced around, taking in my surroundings. A man in a worn-out hoodie sat across from me, his head tilted downward as if he were asleep. Further down, a woman stared blankly at her phone, the glow illuminating her tired features. The only other passenger was a man sitting a few seats away from me, his posture rigid, his hands gripping his knees. At first, I didn't pay much attention to him, assuming he was just another tired commuter. But as the train continued its course, I felt a strange shift in the air. It was subtle, like a static charge crawling over my skin, and when I glanced toward him again, I realized he was watching me. His stare was unblinking, his expression vacant yet intense. I shifted in my seat, pretending not to notice. Maybe he was just zoning out, lost in thought like so many others on late-night trains. I pulled my phone from my pocket, scrolling through the screen to distract myself. The train rattled through another tunnel, the lights flickering again, casting long shadows against the walls. Then he moved. I didn't hear him stand, but I sensed him getting closer. A moment later, he was sitting in the seat beside me, his presence unnervingly close. My grip on my phone tightened, my pulse quickening. I could feel his breath against my ear, warm and deliberate. "They told me to take you." The words were barely above a whisper, but they might as well have been shouted. My entire body went rigid, my breath catching in my throat. I turned my head slightly, just enough to see his face from the corner of my eye. His expression hadn't changed, his lips barely moving as he spoke. I forced myself to stay calm, to not react too strongly. Maybe he was just some unstable person looking to get a rise out of me. But something about the way he said it so flat, so certain, made my skin crawl. "I think you have the wrong person," I said, my voice steady despite the fear creeping into my chest. He didn't blink. "No, they told me it was you." I swallowed hard, my fingers inching toward the emergency call button near the doors. The train swayed as it sped through another tunnel, the lights flickering again. For a moment, his face seemed to distort in the shifting shadows, his eyes hollow, empty. "Who told you that?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. His lips curled into the faintest hint of a smile. "You'll see soon." The train jerked slightly as it began to slow, approaching the next station. I saw my chance. As soon as the doors opened, I bolted, weaving through the handful of passengers on the platform. I didn't care where I was. I just needed to get away. My heart pounded as I reached the stairs, my breath coming in short, panicked bursts. I glanced over my shoulder. The man was still in the train car, sitting in the exact same position, watching me as the doors slid shut. The train pulled away, his gaze locked onto mine until he disappeared into the tunnel. I exhaled sharply, pressing a hand to my chest. My pulse was racing, my skin clammy. What had just happened? Who was he talking about? I tried to shake off the feeling, telling myself it was just a creepy encounter, nothing more. But the unease didn't fade. Even as I left the station and made my way home, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. That night, I double-checked the locks on my door, ensuring every window was secure. I tried to sleep, but every time I closed my eyes, I heard his voice again. "They told me to take you." The next day, I took a different route to work, avoiding the subway entirely. But the paranoia lingered. Every time I passed a reflective surface, I checked behind me. Every time I heard footsteps too close, my heart skipped a beat. A week passed and I started to convince myself that it was just a bizarre, one-time encounter, until I saw him again. I was walking home late, the streets quieter than usual. As I neared my apartment building, I caught a glimpse of someone standing across the street. The streetlight cast a long shadow stretching toward me. My stomach dropped. It was him. He was standing completely still, his head tilted slightly as if studying me. A rush of cold fear washed over me. I fumbled with my keys, heart hammering in my chest. As soon as I got inside, I locked the door, pressing my back against it. I peeked through the peephole, expecting him to be closer. But he hadn't moved. He was still across the street, watching. Minutes passed. Then finally he turned and walked away. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning I considered going to the police, but what would I even say? A man on the subway whispered something creepy to me, and now I think he's following me. There was no proof, no crime. But the fear stayed. Days passed, then weeks. I didn't see him again, but the paranoia never left. I stopped taking the subway. I changed my routine. I never went home the same way twice. Then, one evening, as I was locking up for the night, my phone vibrated on the table. A message from an unknown number. "They told me to take you." I dropped my phone, my blood running cold. My hands shook as I stared at the screen, the words blurring in my vision. A second message came through. A photo. It was me taken from outside my window. Story 21. It was a quiet evening when I first heard the voicemail. I was sitting in my living room, the TV flickering in the background, when my phone buzzed on the coffee table. I glanced at the screen, but the number was unfamiliar, just a string of random digits. My curiosity got the better of me, and I clicked on the voicemail. The moment I pressed play, I noticed something strange. The voice on the other end was distorted, slow, almost as if it were underwater. At first, I couldn't make out any words, just a long string of garbled noises, like someone trying to speak through a thick layer of static. Then, through the distortion, I heard a faint, unmistakable sound. My name. It was barely audible, but I could hear it. My name. My stomach tightened. I listened again, pressing my phone closer to my ear. This time I could make out more of the words, but they didn't make sense. The voice was drawn out, distorted to the point where each syllable felt like it was stretching into something unrecognizable. I felt a chill run down my spine. I knew it was my name, but the rest of it was incomprehensible. Who would leave a voicemail like this? And how did they even get my number? I checked the number again, trying to find any hint of who might have called, but it was just a jumble of digits, no area code or identifying information. I tried to dismiss it as a wrong number or a prank call, but the unsettling feeling lingered. Why was the voice so strange? And why was it trying to say my name? I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. I thought about calling the number back, but a voice in the back of my head told me not to. What if it was someone dangerous, someone who knew more about me than I realized? I set the phone down, but the voicemail replayed in my mind over and over. I couldn't understand the rest of what the voice was saying, but I knew it had mentioned me. That part was clear. My name wasn't something I had imagined. As I sat in the dimly lit room, I started to feel like I was being watched. Every noise in the house seemed louder, every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of leaves outside the window. I reached for my phone again, checking the voicemail once more, but the distorted voice sounded even more distant and warped a second time. It was as though the words were being buried deeper under the static. The next morning, I woke up with a sense of unease that hadn't gone away. I tried to go about my day, pushing the voicemail to the back of my mind, but something kept gnawing at me. When I checked my phone again, the voicemail was still there. The unknown number, the distorted message, all lingering in my inbox. I decided to save the message and show it to a friend. Maybe they would know what was going on. But when I played the voicemail for them, something strange happened. The voice had changed. It was still distorted, but now the words seemed to be clearer, more coherent. It was as though the message had morphed overnight. The voice sounded like it was closer, more direct, almost like it was coming from inside the room. My friend looked at me, concern flickering in her eyes. What the hell is that? I felt my heart race. I had heard the message last night, and it was completely different now. There was no doubt in my mind that something was wrong. The voicemail had changed on its own. The voice had become more intelligible, and it was saying things that I had never heard before. "Who's doing this?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Why are they saying my name?" My friend was quiet for a moment, and then they offered a suggestion that made my blood run cold. "Maybe it's a glitch. You know, like those weird things that happen with voicemails sometimes. Maybe you should report it." But I knew deep down that this wasn't just a glitch. The voice wasn't random, it was deliberate, and whatever it was trying to communicate felt personal. That night, I tried to forget about the voicemail. I tried to convince myself it was just some strange mistake, a weird technological glitch. But when I went to bed, I kept thinking about the words the voice had said. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. The darkness in my bedroom felt heavier than usual, pressing in on me. I lay still, waiting for the sound of my phone ringing again, but it never did. The following days were even worse. I began to feel like I was being followed. Everywhere I went, I would catch glimpses of people staring at me. But when I turned to look, they would turn away. Every time I checked my phone, the voicemail was still there. But the words continued to distort, becoming harder to understand with each passing day. The next voicemail I received was more disturbing than the last. This time, the voice was completely unintelligible, a garbled mess of sounds. But the tone was unmistakable hostile, as though whoever was speaking was angry, frustrated that I wasn't understanding the message. I decided to delete the voicemail, hoping it would end whatever this was. But when I did, the message didn't disappear. Instead, it reappeared fresh and new, as if I had never deleted it at all. The voice was still distorted, still calling my name, still repeating those haunting words. I didn't know what to do anymore. The more I tried to ignore it, the more present it became. The voicemail, the distorted voice, it felt like something from another world, or maybe something that had been following me for longer than I realized. Whoever or whatever was behind this knew my name, and now it seemed like it was getting closer. I had no choice but to listen. I had to find out what it wanted. Story 22. I was sitting on my couch, scrolling through my phone when I got a message from my best friend, Emma. It was a simple text, just like the hundreds of others we'd exchanged over the years. "Hey, want to grab coffee later?" But something about the message felt off. Emma had always been enthusiastic about our coffee dates, always using exclamation points or a smiley face. This message was dry, almost distant. I paused, staring at the screen. The text was from her usual number, but it was the tone that threw me. I shook it off, figuring she might just be in a rush or having a bad day. I responded quickly, suggesting we meet at our usual spot around noon. The reply came almost immediately. "Sure, sounds good." Again, the flatness of it bothered me, but I didn't want to overthink it. When I arrived at the cafe, I spotted her right away. She was sitting at a corner booth, sipping on a drink, her eyes focused on her phone. She looked like herself, but there was something subtle about her posture that made me uneasy. She wasn't smiling. She wasn't tapping away on her phone like she usually did when she was excited about something. It was as if she was just there. "Hey," I called out as I slid into the seat across from her. She looked up, but her smile didn't reach her eyes. She set her phone down, and for a moment I could have sworn I saw a flicker of confusion in her gaze. "Hey," she replied, her voice too quiet. "How've you been?" "I've been good," I said, watching her closely. There was something in her tone, something I couldn't put my finger on, that made me uneasy. "You okay? You seem a little off." She blinked at me, almost as if she hadn't heard the question. Then she nodded slowly. "Yeah, I'm fine. Just tired." She let out a sigh, but it felt forced. I studied her for a second longer, my concern growing. She was always the one to radiate energy, to fill the space around her with excitement. This version of her was a stranger. I changed the subject, hoping to get her talking in a way that felt more familiar. I asked her about her new job, how things were going with her boyfriend, if she had any weekend plans. She answered each question, but her responses were clipped, detached, and almost mechanical. She didn't ask me anything in return, which was unlike her. Emma was always the first to inquire about my life, my work, and my family. The conversation grew even more strained as I tried to bring up our past memories, our favorite trips, the stupid inside jokes we always laughed about. She smiled politely at first, but it quickly faded. She didn't laugh like she used to. She didn't even chuckle. It was as if she was there physically, but emotionally she wasn't. "Are you sure everything's okay?" I asked again, leaning forward slightly. "You're acting really strange today." She froze for a split second, her fingers gripping her cup tighter, and then she let out a laugh that didn't sound like hers at all. It was sharp and uncomfortable. "Yeah, I told you I'm fine," she said, but it didn't feel reassuring. I felt a wave of unease wash over me. Something was definitely wrong, but I couldn't place it. The whole situation was like a bad dream. She looked like Emma, sounded like Emma, but every little detail felt off. My gut told me something was horribly wrong. I glanced down at my phone, hoping to distract myself. A message from Emma popped up. "Sorry, I'm going to head out early," it read. "See you later." I blinked in confusion. She was sitting right across from me. I raised my head to ask her about the message, but when I looked at her, her face was blank. She wasn't looking at me. She was staring at something in the distance, her eyes unfocused. My heart raced as I unlocked my phone and checked the message again. It was from her number, just like before. "Emma," I said softly, feeling my throat tighten. "Why did you just text me?" Her head snapped toward me, her eyes locking onto mine. But the expression on her face was cold, nothing like the warmth I was used to seeing. It was as if someone else was wearing her skin, using her voice. "I didn't text you," she said, her tone flat. I felt a chill run down my spine. "What do you mean?" "I just got a text from you. I am looking at it right now." I showed her the screen of my phone, and she didn't react the way I expected. There was no recognition, no surprise, no acknowledgement at all. "I didn't send that," she said again, this time more firmly. She stood up suddenly, her movement stiff, unnatural. "I need to go. I need to go." I watched her walk out, her steps quick and calculated. My mind was racing. I stared at my phone for a long moment before I looked up. The cafe, the sounds of the busy city outside, all felt like they were closing in around me. I waited for a few minutes, trying to process what had just happened. My mind kept coming back to one thought. That wasn't her. Something was wrong, deeply wrong, and I needed answers. When I got home, I did the only thing I could think of. I called Emma's number. It rang a few times, and when she picked up, it wasn't her voice. "Hello?" the voice said, but it wasn't Emma. It was too smooth, too controlled. "Who is this?" I asked, my voice trembling. The voice on the other end chuckled. "Don't worry, she'll be back soon." Then the line went dead. I stood there in the silence, staring at my phone in disbelief. My best friend, the person I trusted most in the world, was gone. The woman who had been sitting across from me at the cafe wasn't her. Something had replaced her, and I had no idea what it wanted. Story 23. I had been on the road for a few days. driving through small towns and staying in whatever motels I could find. By the time I checked into the hotel, I was exhausted. The room was plain but clean, and all I wanted was a hot shower and some sleep before heading out again in the morning. I locked the door behind me, placed my bag on the bed, and started unpacking. After a quick shower, I curled up in bed, the exhaustion of the past few days catching up with me. The hum of the air conditioner was the only sound, a comforting white noise that helped me unwind. The room was dark, save for the faint glow of a streetlight outside that filtered through the curtains. I was just about to drift off when I heard it. A soft jiggling noise came from the door handle. At first, I thought it might be the wind, but the sound persisted, growing slightly louder. I sat up in bed, my heart skipping a beat. The door was locked, and no one had knocked or announced themselves. The jiggling stopped for a moment, but then it came again this time, more insistent, like someone was trying to turn the knob from the outside. I froze, staring at the door. The room felt suddenly colder, the stillness unnerving. I didn't know what to do. I considered getting up and checking the peephole, but something told me not to move. The noise continued, now accompanied by a faint scratching sound, as though someone was running their fingers along the doorframe. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. I grabbed my phone from the nightstand and dialed the front desk. The line rang several times before someone picked up, their voice crackling through the receiver. "Front desk, how may I help you?" I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm in room 211, and there's someone at my door. The handle keeps jiggling, and I don't know who it is. Can you check if anyone's supposed to be on this floor?" There was a brief pause before the receptionist replied, "I'm sorry, but we have no record of anyone else being on your floor tonight. You're the only guest on that level." My stomach twisted. The jiggling continued, but now there was a low, muffled thudding, like someone was pressing their body against the door. My mind raced. Who could it be? A prank? A mistake? Or something more sinister? I stood up from the bed, my legs shaky beneath me. I didn't want to open the door, but I couldn't just sit there either. "I'm not opening the door," I said, my voice trembling. "Is there anyone who can come up here?" "We'll send someone right away," the receptionist assured me. "Stay in your room and lock the door. We'll have security check it out." I hung up and backed away from the door, clutching my phone. The sounds on the other side were growing louder, pounding now, as if someone was trying to break through. My heart was in my throat, and I felt a cold sweat break out across my forehead. Was it possible someone had gotten in somehow? I thought about the window, but the curtain was drawn tightly, and I wasn't about to try climbing out in the middle of the night. I considered barricading the door with the furniture, but before I could act, the noises suddenly stopped. The silence was deafening. For a moment I wondered if I had imagined the whole thing. But then the door handle jiggled once more, and this time it wasn't a light touch. It was forceful, violent, as if someone was trying to get in at any cost. I jumped back, my pulse racing. Just as I was about to call the front desk again, I heard footsteps in the hallway. They were quick, hurried, as if someone was running. The security guard arrived almost immediately, and I could hear his voice outside the door, muffled through the thick wood. He knocked twice, his voice firm and urgent. "Mom, it's security. Are you all right?" I opened the door a crack, just enough to see his face. He looked concerned, scanning the hallway behind him as if expecting someone to appear. "Are you sure no one came up here?" he asked. "I don't know," I whispered. "I thought I heard someone trying to get in." The security guard frowned and opened the door wider, stepping into the room. He checked the lock and the chain, inspecting everything closely. "There's no sign of forced entry," he said, looking puzzled. "No one's been up here. I'm sorry, but I don't know what to tell you." I felt a cold knot tighten in my stomach. How could that be? I had clearly heard someone trying to get in. I stared at him, trying to process what he was saying. But the noises, those sounds, someone was at my door. I heard them. He nodded, though he seemed skeptical. "I'm not saying you didn't hear something, but there's no sign of anyone being up here. I'll have a look around the building just to be safe, but I can't promise anything." The security guard left, and I stood there, torn between relief and confusion. Had it been a prank? Was I just overreacting after a long day of travel? I locked the door again and tried to settle back into bed, but I couldn't shake the unease that had settled over me. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the silence of the room. But just when I thought I might finally drift off, the jiggling started again. This time it was softer, almost like a whisper of movement. I shot up in bed, heart pounding in my chest. The door was locked. I was sure of it, but the sounds persisted. I called the front desk again, my voice trembling. "There's something wrong. It's happening again." "We'll send someone up right now," the receptionist said quickly, her tone reassuring. This time I didn't wait for anyone to arrive. I grabbed my bag and ran down the hallway to the elevator. I wasn't about to stay in that room for another minute. I didn't know what had been trying to get in or why, but I wasn't taking any chances. When I reached the lobby, the front desk clerk looked up, startled. "Is everything okay?" she asked. "I'm checking out," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'll find another place to stay tonight." The receptionist nodded, no questions asked. As I stepped out into the night, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been in that hotel room with me, waiting just beyond the door. I didn't know what it was, but I wasn't going back to find out. Story 24. I was just minding my own business, walking through the aisles of the grocery store. The hum of the fluorescent lights above mixed with the quiet murmur of people shopping around me. It was an ordinary afternoon, and I was picking out a few things for dinner. The list was simple: some vegetables, a loaf of bread, and a bottle of wine. As I reached for a bunch of carrots, I felt a sudden, sharp tug on my arm. My heart skipped a beat, and before I could turn to see who had grabbed me, I heard a voice, low and urgent, whisper in my ear, "You need to come with me. I'm your mother." I froze. The woman was standing too close, her grip on my arm tight and insistent. Her face was unfamiliar, her expression almost frantic, but there was something about her that seemed oddly familiar. I quickly glanced at her. She was in her late 40s, with dark, unkempt hair and a look in her eyes that could only be described as desperate. I tried to pull my arm away, my brain screaming at me to get out of there. "What are you talking about?" I managed to say, my voice a mix of confusion and alarm, but the woman's grip only tightened. "You don't remember me, do you?" she said, her voice trembling as if she were about to cry. "I'm your mother. I know it's been a long time, but you need to come with me right now. There's no time." I stared at her, my heart racing. "No," I said firmly, my other hand pushing against her arm. "You're not my mother. I don't know who you are, but you need to let go of me." The woman's face twisted with a mix of frustration and something else. Was it fear? Her eyes darted around as if she were checking to see if anyone else was watching. "I don't have time for this," she muttered. "You need to trust me. Please." At this point, I was starting to panic. I could feel the eyes of other shoppers on us, but no one seemed to be stepping in. I tried again to break free, but her grip was like iron. "Please, just let go." I nearly shouted, the fear beginning to edge into my voice. Suddenly, a hand gripped my shoulder from behind, pulling me away from the woman. "Hey, are you all right?" a calm male voice asked. It was one of the store employees, a young man with a concerned look on his face. Before I could respond, the woman looked at him with wild eyes. "She's mine," she shouted, her voice rising in pitch. "She's my daughter, you have to help me." The employee didn't hesitate. He immediately turned to the woman and said, "Ma'am, you need to step away from the customer. Now." He didn't raise his voice, but there was authority in his tone that made her hesitate. For a moment, I thought she might lash out, but instead her expression shifted to one of confusion. She looked between me and the employee, her grip loosening. She released my arm entirely, but her eyes never left me. I took a few steps back, my pulse still racing. The employee stood between us, his stance firm. "Are you all right?" he asked me again, his eyes now scanning me for any signs of injury. I nodded, still too shaken to speak. I couldn't stop staring at the woman, who was now standing several feet away, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. "I don't know what's happening," I whispered, almost to myself. The woman's eyes filled with tears. "You don't remember me," she said softly, almost pleading. "I've waited for so long, please, you have to come with me. I'm your mother. I'm the one who—" "I don't know you," I snapped, my voice growing louder. "I don't know who you are. Let me go." The woman's face crumpled in despair. For a moment I thought she might collapse, but instead, she turned on her heel and walked quickly toward the exit. She didn't look back, her footsteps echoing faintly in the quiet store. I stood there, unable to move, as the employee continued to watch me closely. "Are you sure you're okay?" he asked, his voice gentler now. I nodded again, though my head was spinning. What had just happened? Who was that woman? Why had she said such strange things to me? "Do you need me to call someone for you?" he asked. "Maybe the police." I shook my head slowly. "I don't think they'd believe me," I muttered. The employee gave me a sympathetic look, but didn't argue. "All right, but if you change your mind, let me know. If you need help, just ask." I nodded, finally managing to regain my composure. I turned back to my cart, still unsure of what to do. I couldn't shake the image of the woman's face, the desperation, the pain in her eyes. Had she really believed I was her daughter? I finished my shopping in a daze, my thoughts constantly returning to that brief encounter. As I walked out of the store and back to my car, I kept checking behind me, half expecting the woman to appear again, to grab me and try to take me away. The drive home was a blur, my mind racing with questions I couldn't answer. Was it possible that the woman had been telling the truth? I had no memory of her, no recollection of ever meeting her before. But there had been something so real in her voice, so urgent, that I couldn't entirely dismiss it. When I got home, I locked the door behind me, my fingers trembling as I turned the key. I sat down on my couch and tried to calm my breathing, but the unsettling feeling lingered. Who was that woman? And why did she say she was my mother? It wasn't until later that evening that I found the answer, though it wasn't the one I was hoping for. My phone buzzed with a text from my sister. "Mom called today. She's in the hospital again. She keeps asking about you." My stomach dropped. I didn't know how to feel. Story 25. It started on a Tuesday evening, just like any other. I was sitting at the kitchen table, scrolling through my phone when my mom called me from the window. Her voice sounded a little off, but I assumed it was nothing. I stood up and walked over to the window, peering out to see what she was talking about. At the end of our street, near the highway, a road sign had been spray painted. The black paint stood out against the white metal, stark and jarring. I squinted, trying to read the words in the dim light. My heart skipped a beat when I made them out clearly. Your name next. The message was scrawled in uneven letters, as though someone had been in a rush, but there was no mistaking what it said. I felt a cold sweat break out on the back of my neck. My name. Why my name? And why would someone do this? The last thing I wanted was to go down there alone, but the more I stared at the sign, the more I knew I had to check it out. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. "Mom, can you come with me?" I asked, my voice trembling. My mom gave me a puzzled look but agreed. We got into the car and drove the short distance to the highway. As we got closer, I could see the sign clearly. It was as disturbing in person as it had been from a distance. The paint was still fresh, the words bold and threatening. My stomach turned as I stared at it. Why would someone target me? Who would do something like this? My mom, sensing my unease, tried to comfort me. "It's probably just some prank. Kids do stupid stuff like this all the time." But I wasn't so sure. Something about the message felt different. It wasn't just a random act of vandalism. It felt personal, like the person knew me. I took out my phone and snapped a picture of the sign. I didn't want to wait around, but I also didn't want to leave it like this. We sat there for a moment, staring at the sign in silence. The weight of it hung in the air, thick and suffocating. We drove home shortly after, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I tried to brush it off, telling myself it was just my nerves. But as the night wore on, I couldn't stop thinking about it. Who had done it, and why? The next morning, I woke up to a sense of dread gnawing at my insides. I checked my phone first thing, hoping for some normalcy. But instead, I found a text from an unknown number. My heart skipped a beat when I read it. "Did you see the sign?" The message sent a chill down my spine. How did they know I was looking at the sign? I had told no one about it. I hadn't even posted anything on social media. I stared at the screen for a long time, my fingers hovering over the keys, unsure of how to respond. I didn't want to provoke whoever it was, but I also didn't want to sit in silence. I typed back, "Who is this?" and waited. The response came quickly, almost too quickly. "You're next." I froze. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. My mind raced, trying to make sense of it. Was this some kind of sick joke? A warning? Or something worse? I turned to my mom, who was making breakfast in the kitchen. I showed her the text, my hands shaking as I passed her the phone. Her face paled when she read it. "You need to tell the police," she said quietly. I nodded, but I didn't feel any relief. I couldn't explain why, but the feeling of being watched didn't go away. That nagging sense of dread clung to me like a shadow, even as we made our way to the police station. The officer who took our report seemed sympathetic, but he didn't seem overly concerned. "It could be a prank, ma'am. We get weird things like this all the time," he said. He wrote down the details and promised to keep an eye on the area, but I could tell he wasn't taking it seriously. I left the station feeling more uneasy than when I had walked in. What if this was more than just a prank? What if I was in real danger? The thought followed me for the rest of the day, hanging over me like a dark cloud. I decided to take matters into my own hands. I drove back to the sign, alone this time. The night had fallen, and the highway was empty. I could barely make out the sign in the darkness, but I knew it was there. As I got closer, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The paint on the sign was smudged, as though someone had been wiping it. I pulled over, my hands gripping the steering wheel as I stepped out of the car. The words were still there, but there was something new, fresh paint splattered in a wide arc around the sign. It was as though someone had been adding to it, making it bigger, more ominous. My heart pounded in my chest as I stared at the mess of colors. I walked closer, hesitant, my feet dragging in the gravel. I took another step forward and froze. Under the spray-painted words, someone had carved something into the metal. It was hard to make out at first, but as I got closer, I realized what it said. "I'm watching you." The blood drained from my face. I stumbled back, my hand flying to my mouth as I fought to keep from screaming. My heart hammered in my chest. I turned and ran back to the car, slamming the door behind me. I don't know how long I sat there, my hands shaking, staring at the sign from the safety of the car. The feeling of being watched intensified. My eyes flicked around the street, searching for movement, for any sign of the person who had done this, but the night remained silent. I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't safe. I had to get out of there. I drove home, locking every door behind me. That night I barely slept, the words "your name" next echoing in my mind. I had no idea who was behind it or why they had chosen me. But I knew one thing for sure: whoever it was, they were still out there, watching. Story 26. The coffee shop was bustling as usual, the warm aroma of roasted beans filling the air. I was just finishing up my work when I decided to take a break and grab a coffee. The barista, a young woman with dark hair and a tired smile, had been the one to serve me for the past few weeks. We exchanged a polite nod as she handed me my drink, but something about her expression made me pause. I noticed the napkin she placed under my cup, folded in a way that looked deliberate. For a moment I assumed it was just a regular napkin, maybe with a logo or something to wipe off any coffee stains. But when I unfolded it, my stomach twisted. The napkin read in neat, block letters, "Do not go home tonight." I stared at the words, my mind racing. What did that even mean? The first thought that crossed my mind was that it was some kind of prank. Maybe a joke from a friend, or even an employee at the shop who had written it for some unknown reason. But no one I knew would pull something like that, especially not in such a cryptic way. I looked back up at the barista, expecting some sign of recognition, maybe a wink or a chuckle to indicate that it was a harmless prank. But her face was unreadable. She glanced at me for only a moment before turning away, wiping down the counter. That was odd. She had always been polite, but she never acted so distant. I tried to brush it off as a strange coincidence. After all, it could have been a mistake. But the more I stared at the napkin, the more my pulse quickened. The message felt deliberate, too deliberate to ignore. As I left the coffee shop, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I drove home with the windows down, trying to clear my head. The late afternoon sunlight cast long shadows on the street, and everything seemed normal. Still, I couldn't escape the unease growing in my chest. The words on the napkin kept echoing in my mind. When I pulled into my driveway, I glanced around as I always did. My house was quiet, nothing out of place. Still, the nagging feeling of being watched lingered. I took a deep breath and told myself it was nothing, just a weird coincidence. But the nagging doubt refused to leave. As I reached the door, I paused. Something didn't feel right. My heart raced as I fumbled for my keys, suddenly feeling like the walls around me were closing in. I glanced over my shoulder, but there was nothing unusual outside. No car parked across the street, no strange figures lurking in the shadows. Still, I couldn't shake the discomfort. The door clicked open, and I stepped inside. The silence was deafening. I closed the door behind me and locked it, my hands shaking slightly as I set my keys down on the hallway table. The house was dark, except for the dim light filtering in from the street. I took a few steps into the living room, but before I could turn on the lights, something caught my eye. A figure, a shadow, was standing in the corner of the room, just past the edge of the couch. My heart stopped, and I froze in place. I couldn't make out any details, but the shape was unmistakable. A person, standing still, watching me. I barely dared to breathe, unsure of whether I was imagining things or if someone was really there. My fingers trembled as I reached for my phone, keeping my eyes fixed on the shadow. I texted a friend, asking if they could come over. I didn't want to call the police just yet, not without knowing what was really going on. But as soon as I hit send, the shadow moved slowly, deliberately toward the doorway. My breath caught in my throat. The figure was leaving. Without thinking, I grabbed the nearest object I could find, a heavy vase, and held it tight in my hands, ready to defend myself. But the figure never reached the door. Instead, it seemed to disappear into the darkness of the hallway. I waited, holding the vase with white knuckles, straining to hear any sound. Nothing. The silence was deafening. My phone buzzed in my hand, and I quickly read my friend's message. "I'm on my way. Are you okay?" I didn't respond immediately, my eyes still scanning the shadows. Something felt off, but I couldn't put my finger on it. Was this all in my head, or had I really seen something? After what felt like an eternity, I finally turned on the lights, shaking off my nerves. I checked every room in the house, but there was no sign of anyone. No one was hiding, no windows or doors had been opened. It was as if the figure had never been there at all. Still, I wasn't convinced. My phone buzzed again, and I texted my friend back, letting them know that I was fine. But deep down, I didn't feel fine. Something about tonight, about the napkin, didn't sit right with me. I tried to go back to my routine, watching TV, eating dinner, but the discomfort remained. I finally went to bed, but sleep didn't come easily. Every noise in the house, every creak of the floorboards made me jump. The words on the napkin kept replaying in my mind, "Do not go home tonight." As I lay in bed, I tried to rationalize it all. Maybe it was just a coincidence. Maybe the barista had some weird reason for giving me that message. But the more I thought about it, the more everything seemed connected, like I had narrowly avoided something or someone. I don't know when I finally fell asleep, but the morning brought no relief. I woke up with a sense of dread still hanging over me. The house was quiet, the world outside calm, but inside I felt like I was still on edge, waiting for something to happen. The barista's words echoed in my mind throughout the day. What if they weren't just a warning, but a message? A warning that someone had been watching me, someone who knew I was about to be in danger. I haven't been back to that coffee shop since. The barista hasn't been there when I've gone by, and no one seems to remember who she was. But the note stays with me, and I can't shake the feeling that something or someone is still watching. Story 27. The abandoned construction site was always an intriguing place. I had heard stories about it from people in town, how the work had stopped abruptly, the machinery left half-finished, and the entire site left to rust and decay. No one ever talked about why the project was abandoned, but I was curious. On a warm afternoon, with nothing else to do, I decided to explore it for myself. The site was eerily quiet. Dust floated lazily in the air, and the skeletal remains of half-built walls and rusting metal beams loomed over the landscape. I wandered through the empty site, the faint sound of my footsteps the only noise breaking the silence. It was almost like stepping into another world, one frozen in time. I wandered further into the heart of the construction zone, where an old pipe system lay in the dirt, half buried and forgotten. The pipes were large, their metal frames covered in grime and rust, making them look more like ancient ruins than anything functional. I bent down to inspect them, the urge to see what lay inside overtaking me. That's when I heard it. The faint vibration of a phone ringing. My heart skipped a beat as I glanced around. There was no one in sight, just me and the skeletal remains of the construction site. The sound was subtle, barely perceptible, but it was there. It was a phone vibrating, unmistakably. I froze, trying to pinpoint where the sound was coming from. The air felt thicker, as if the silence of the site had thickened around me. The vibrations grew louder, more distinct. Slowly, I realized they were coming from inside one of the large pipes, the rusted metal frame humming with each vibration. I approached the pipe cautiously, my curiosity battling with an increasing sense of unease. The phone had to be inside, but how could it be ringing inside a pipe, abandoned and buried under dirt and rubble for so long? There was no way anyone else could be here. The place had been vacant for years. My hands trembled slightly as I crouched down by the pipe, the vibrations continuing at a steady pace. I reached out, pressing my ear to the rusted metal, trying to get a better sense of where it was coming from. The phone rang again, the vibration sending a strange chill through me. I could hear the faintest buzz, as if the phone was alive, waiting for someone to answer. I considered leaving. The rational part of my mind told me that whatever was going on wasn't worth investigating. But the pull of mystery, of unanswered questions, kept me rooted in place. I had to know what was causing the sound. Without thinking, I stood up and looked around for anything I could use to dig around the pipe. I found a broken piece of concrete nearby and used it to scrape away the dirt. The vibrations in the pipe seemed to grow louder, as though the phone knew I was getting closer. A chill ran down my spine, but I kept digging, determined to reach it. After a few minutes of frantic digging, I exposed a small gap in the pipe. The vibrating phone was somewhere inside, just out of reach. I had no idea how it could have gotten there. My mind raced with possibilities. Had someone hidden it? Had it been there the whole time, undisturbed by the years of decay? I reached into the gap, my fingers brushing against something soft. Then, the buzzing stopped abruptly. For a moment, I thought the phone had stopped ringing, but as I pulled it out of the pipe, I realized it was still vibrating in my hand. It wasn't an ordinary phone. It was an old, cracked model, the screen flickering with a faint, distorted image. I stepped back, staring at the phone in my hands. The screen displayed a single message: "Pick up." My heart raced. The message had been typed out, clear as day, as if someone was trying to get my attention. I hesitated for a moment, weighing the fear in my gut against the irresistible urge to see what would happen next. I took a deep breath and pressed the green button. The phone clicked, and a voice filled the air. "Hello?" It was a distorted voice, thick with static. It sounded familiar, but I couldn't place it. "Is someone there?" I nearly dropped the phone. The voice, though crackled and faint, sounded like it was coming from someone I knew. I didn't know how it was possible, but the voice seemed too real to be a recording. My mind raced, trying to make sense of it. Before I could respond, the voice continued, its tone growing more frantic. "You need to get out of there. It's not safe." I felt my throat tighten, a sense of dread seeping into my bones. Who was this? How did they know where I was? My mind spun with possibilities, none of them comforting. I glanced around the abandoned construction site, suddenly feeling a lot less deserted. The emptiness seemed to close in on me, and I realized just how alone I really was. I asked, my voice trembling, "Who is this?" But the phone went silent, the screen flickering again. I waited for what felt like an eternity, the silence pressing down on me. Then the voice came back, even more distorted this time. "You shouldn't have come. You should have left when you had the chance. Now it's too late." I nearly dropped the phone as I backed away from the pipe, my legs unsteady. The sense of something watching me, something lurking in the shadows, was overwhelming. Every corner of the site seemed to hold a secret, a story left untold. The phone in my hand was growing warmer, vibrating harder. In a panic, I ended the call, the screen going black. I stood there, breathing heavily, unsure of what to do next. Every inch of my body screamed at me to leave, to get as far away from that cursed site as possible. I turned to run, but something made me stop. From the corner of my eye, I thought I saw a figure standing in the distance, a shadow among the ruins. My pulse thundered in my ears as I bolted out of the construction site. The image of that shadow burned into my mind. I never went back to the site. The phone, the voice, and the figure still haunt me. Every time I close my eyes, I wonder who had been on the other end of that call, and what they had meant by "it's too late." Story 28. I had never been the type to lose things, but one afternoon I realized I had misplaced my wallet. I had been running errands all day, picking up groceries, stopping by the bank, and getting a coffee at the drive-thru. When I reached for my wallet to pay for something, my heart sank. It wasn't in my purse. I quickly checked every pocket and compartment, but it was gone. At first, I thought it was a mistake. Maybe I had left it in the car or at the store. I retraced my steps as best I could, but nothing turned up. A sense of unease settled in as I realized it could have fallen out anywhere. I called the bank to cancel my cards, alerting them to the situation, but the nagging feeling that something was wrong lingered. Days passed without any sign of my wallet. I filed a police report, but I didn't really expect much to come of it. I couldn't stop thinking about the small, dark thought creeping into my mind that someone had taken it on purpose. The way the wallet had disappeared so cleanly, with no signs of it being dropped or misplaced. Maybe someone had been watching me. A week went by. I went on with my life, trying to shake the lingering suspicion that someone had stolen my wallet and was possibly using my identity. Then, on a chilly morning, a strange envelope appeared in my mailbox. It was plain, with no return address, just my name written in neat handwriting. My pulse quickened as I opened it, expecting the worst. Inside was my wallet. Everything was there: my ID, credit cards, even the few cash bills I had kept. Everything was untouched. My heart skipped a beat as I looked over the contents, confirming that nothing had been removed. It was as if whoever had taken it had simply decided to return it. But there was something else. A small piece of paper slipped between the bills, folded neatly. I unfolded it, my hands trembling slightly. The note read simply, "You got lucky." I stood there for a moment, staring at the note, my breath catching in my throat. The words seemed so out of place, almost chilling in their simplicity. My first thought was to call the police, but what could they do? The wallet had been returned, and there was no sign of tampering. Still, the phrase stuck with me. I had gotten lucky. Lucky from what? I felt like I was losing my grip on reality. The more I thought about it, the more unsettling the whole situation became. What kind of person would take my wallet, then return it with such an odd message? It felt like a game, but I wasn't sure if I was the player or the prey. I couldn't ignore the nagging sense that there was more to this than a simple lost and found story. I spent the next few days obsessing over the note. I kept it tucked inside my wallet, studying the handwriting, hoping it might give me some clue about the person behind it. The writing was neat, too neat to be from someone careless. Whoever had taken my wallet had done so deliberately, and whoever had returned it seemed to know exactly what they were doing. I tried to go on with my life, but the strange feeling wouldn't go away. My mind raced with possibilities. Was someone watching me? Had they been following me around? And what was with the cryptic message? It wasn't a typical note left by a thief. They might have taken the money and run, but this person had returned everything. It didn't make sense. A week later, as I was walking to my car in the parking lot, something caught my eye. A glint of metal on the ground. I knelt down, heart racing, and picked up a small key. It was old, tarnished, with a rusted tag hanging from it. I flipped it over, expecting some kind of clue, but the tag was blank. I couldn't shake the feeling that the key was connected to everything. Maybe it was a sign, or maybe I was overthinking things. But it didn't feel like a coincidence. Why would I find this key now? I kept it with me, tucking it into my pocket as I went about my day, but my thoughts kept returning to the mysterious message in my wallet. Days passed, and nothing else unusual happened. I started to convince myself that maybe I had just imagined the whole thing, that it was a weird coincidence, and I was making a bigger deal out of it than necessary. But I couldn't shake the sense that I was being watched. The key, the note, everything felt connected. Then, one night, as I was coming home, I noticed something strange. A car was parked outside my house, a dark sedan, parked too close to my driveway. I didn't recognize it. I froze, my heart hammering in my chest, before I quickly darted inside. My mind raced as I locked the door behind me. Was it connected to the wallet? To the key? I couldn't be sure, but the sense of unease returned with full force. I didn't sleep that night. I watched from my window, waiting, hoping to see something, anything that would explain why the car was there. By morning, the sedan was gone, but the feeling of being watched didn't fade. I began to wonder if this was just the beginning of something much larger. Since then, I haven't found any more notes or keys, but the nagging feeling has never really left. I keep my wallet close, checking it every so often, half expecting it to disappear again. And when I walk down the street, I always look over my shoulder. I don't know who was behind the strange note or the key, but I've learned one thing. Sometimes you don't get answers. Sometimes you just get lucky. Story 29. It was late afternoon when I sat on my couch, scrolling aimlessly through my phone. I had just returned from a hike in the nearby mountains, and I wanted to check out the photos I'd taken earlier that day. My thumb swiped across the screen, stopping as I reached the photo array. I had snapped several shots of the view, a few close-ups of plants, and even a selfie at the summit. But as I flicked through the images, something felt wrong. The photos from my hike weren't there. My recent pictures were gone, replaced by an empty grid of black spaces. A cold wave of panic surged through me as I checked my albums, frantically searching for any sign of my trip. But there was nothing. No photos from today. No pictures from the past week. It was as if everything had been erased from my phone. I checked the recently deleted folder, hoping they'd just been accidentally moved there. My heart skipped a beat when I saw that it too was empty. How was that possible? I had not deleted anything intentionally. The only thing that remained was one single photo at the very end of my gallery. It was a photo of me. A selfie, but one I didn't remember taking. The picture was blurry, the angle strange, like it had been taken from below, as if I hadn't been holding the camera. My skin looked pale, my expression distant, like I was staring off into the distance. The background was dark, a dim room that I didn't recognize. I blinked, staring at the photo in disbelief. I was sure I hadn't taken it. The last time I had checked my phone, it had been with me on the mountain. There was no way I had taken this photo while hiking. My hands shook as I zoomed in, looking for any clue that might explain the unfamiliar setting. But nothing made sense. I scrolled through the rest of the photos again, hoping I had missed something. But the only image that remained was that strange, blurry selfie. I felt a knot tighten in my stomach as I wondered if my phone had been hacked. Maybe someone had gained access to it and deleted everything. But then how did they leave that one picture? And who had taken it? I stood up, pacing the room, trying to calm my racing thoughts. It had to be a glitch, right? Some weird phone malfunction. I decided to restart the device, hoping that would solve the problem. But when it powered back on, the photo was still there, sitting at the end of the gallery, as if mocking me. I took a deep breath and tried to rationalize the situation. Maybe it wasn't a glitch. Maybe I had taken the photo and just didn't remember. That seemed unlikely, though, given the blurry quality and the strange background. I knew the room in the photo wasn't mine. It wasn't my apartment, my bedroom, or any place I had been recently. As the hours passed, I couldn't shake the unsettling feeling gnawing at the back of my mind. I turned the photo over and over in my head, trying to recall anything that might explain it. But there was nothing. No memory of being in a dimly lit room, no recollection of anyone else being present. Just that blank space where my memories should have been. I decided to take action. I downloaded a photo recovery app, hoping it would restore the photos that had mysteriously disappeared. As it ran its scan, my phone buzzed in my hand. A notification popped up, alerting me to a new text message. The sender's name was unknown to me. I hesitated before opening it, my curiosity getting the better of me. The message was simple, with only one line. "Do you remember taking this?" Attached was the very same blurry selfie. My stomach dropped. How did they have it? How did they even know I was looking at it? I rushed to check the sender's information, but there was nothing, no phone number, no contact details, just a blank space where they should have been. I couldn't even trace the message back to a source. I stared at the screen for a moment before deleting the message. My head was spinning, 1,000 questions racing through my mind. I decided to reach out to my friends. Maybe they had seen me take the photo and could provide some clarity. I texted a few of them, asking if they had noticed anything strange on my phone. No one had any answers. A few jokingly suggested I had taken the picture while sleepwalking, but that didn't explain how the background looked so unfamiliar. Frustrated and exhausted, I lay back on my couch, my phone still clutched tightly in my hand. I had no idea what was happening, but the whole thing felt wrong. I couldn't stop thinking about that eerie message and the way the photo had appeared out of nowhere. What if it was a warning? Or worse, what if someone had been following me? I couldn't shake the thought of someone having access to my phone, watching my every move. But then, if that were true, how could they have known about my hike? They would have had to be close enough to see me, close enough to know where I was going. The idea made my skin crawl. That night, I tried to sleep, but I couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the photo in my mind, those hollow, vacant eyes staring back at me. I kept thinking about the dimly lit room, the sense of someone being in it with me, but I couldn't remember who or why. The next morning, I woke up with a jolt, my phone still beside me. I checked the gallery again, half expecting the photo to be gone. But there it was, right where it had been the night before. The same blurry, unsettling picture. This time there was a new message. It was from the same unknown sender. This time the message simply said, "You're not alone." I deleted it immediately, but the words echoed in my head for hours afterward. I knew I had to get to the bottom of this, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something or someone was watching me. The photo, the messages, the feeling of being followed, they were all connected, and I couldn't help but wonder what would happen next. Story 30. The bus ride had been uneventful. It was late, well past midnight, and the streets outside were empty, lit only by the occasional flicker of a street lamp. I was the last passenger left, nestled in the back seat, the hum of the engine and the rhythmic squeak of the bus's suspension the only sounds accompanying me. The driver hadn't said a word since I boarded at the last stop, and I had no reason to think anything was out of the ordinary. I glanced at my phone, noting the time. It had been a long day and I was exhausted, ready to get home. My stop was coming up soon, or so I thought. The bus passed a few familiar landmarks, but I hadn't seen my street yet. I frowned, wondering if I had somehow lost track of the stops, though that didn't seem likely. The driver hadn't announced anything, which was unusual. Most drivers would at least give a heads up when your stop was near. I glanced up at the driver, catching his reflection in the rearview mirror. He had a stern look on his face, his eyes focused straight ahead. But as I looked at him, I noticed something strange. There was no one else on the road. Not a single other vehicle. Not a pedestrian in sight. Just the empty, silent street stretching out before us. A chill ran down my spine. I shook it off, reminding myself that it was late, and maybe I was just overtired. But as the bus rolled on past yet another block, I felt the creeping sense of unease grow. We'd passed my stop, and then the one after that. A few more blocks slid by before the bus made a turn onto a road I didn't recognize. I was about to get up and ask the driver what was going on when I heard his voice, low and distant. "You should have gotten off 3 stops ago." The words didn't make sense. My heart skipped a beat. I was stunned into silence, staring at the back of his head, unable to comprehend what he had just said. There was no mistaking it. The voice wasn't casual, it was cold, deliberate, as though he had been expecting something. I opened my mouth to speak, but the words caught in my throat. What was he talking about? Had I somehow missed my stop? Maybe I was still groggy from the long day. My head was spinning now, and the bus seemed to move slower, as though the world outside was slowing down, too. "Excuse me," I managed to say finally, my voice shaking. "I think you passed my stop. I need to get off now. Now." The driver didn't respond immediately. I watched his hands grip the steering wheel, his knuckles turning white. It was as though he hadn't heard me at all. He kept his gaze fixed straight ahead, his expression unreadable. The silence stretched between us, thick and uncomfortable. "Please," I said again, more urgently. "This is my stop. I live just a few blocks from here." Without looking at me, he slowly turned his head toward the mirror, his eyes meeting mine. For the briefest moment, I saw something flicker in his gaze, something sharp, something wrong. His lips twisted into a tight, thin smile, and he said, "You should have gotten off 3 stops ago." I felt the blood drain from my face. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. This wasn't a normal bus ride. Something was very, very wrong. The bus jolted suddenly, as though it had hit a bump in the road, but there had been no bump. It wasn't the streets that were causing it, there was something else going on. The bus swerved, making an unnatural turn that I couldn't follow, and I was thrown sideways in my seat. I scrambled for the edge of the seat, my hand clutching the cold metal as I steadied myself. I tried again to get the driver's attention. "Hey, where are we going? This isn't the right route." The driver didn't respond. His hands remained steady on the wheel, his eyes locked ahead, and the smile on his face remained frozen. The city outside had changed. It was no longer the neighborhood I recognized. The streetlights were dimmer, the buildings more decrepit, and the road had narrowed, as though the city itself had distorted into something unfamiliar. I could feel my pulse pounding in my ears. I stood up, my legs trembling. This couldn't be happening. I rushed to the front, gripped the rail, and tried to open the door, but it wouldn't budge. The metal was cold, unyielding, and I slammed my shoulder against it in desperation. Nothing. It was locked. I turned to the driver, my voice rising in panic. "Let me out. Please. What's going on?" The driver turned his head just slightly, his smile widening now, stretching unnaturally across his face. "You should have gotten off 3 stops ago," he repeated. His voice was almost sing-song, as if he were enjoying this. "You can't leave now." I backed away, my heart racing. Something inside me screamed to jump off the bus, to break the window and run, but I didn't know where I was. I didn't know what was real anymore. The bus continued to move faster now, faster than it should have been. The street outside had become a blur, the city's towering buildings distorting and shifting. I couldn't tell where we were anymore. I tried to remember the landmarks, to find something familiar, but there was nothing. Just endless, empty streets. The sound of the engine roared louder, drowning out all other noises. Then the bus screeched to a halt, and everything went quiet. I looked around in confusion. The doors remained shut, no one spoke. The world outside was pitch black, no stars, no moon, just utter darkness. It was as though the bus had stopped in the middle of nowhere. My breath caught in my throat. I could no longer hear the hum of the engine. The air was thick with the feeling of being completely alone. Slowly, I turned to look at the driver again, but he was gone. The seat was empty. I was the only one on the bus now, just me, the empty seats, and the dark, endless road ahead. The doors remained locked, the windows too high for me to escape. There was nowhere to go. And then, faintly, from somewhere far in the distance, I thought I heard someone whispering, "You should have gotten off 3 stops ago."